Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it's time for Robservations, the show about something. I'm your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I'm here for Robservations number 266, the first Robservations of this November 2019. Of course, I can't let this date go by. I mean, everyone's already talked about it. I put it all over my social media. This is, of course, Blade Runner month, as all of you know. Well, maybe you don't know. On June 25th, 1982, at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, I was at Seattle's Cinerama Theater with Jolie Von Sur and Mike Schertz. And we weren't even 17 yet to buy tickets to an R-rated movie. So we sent Jolie in first because she was a girl and we figured had a better chance of getting our tickets in case anyone said anything. They didn't. And we went and saw Blade Runner, which, of course, opens with the title card, Los Angeles, November 2019. That was 37 years ago. I can't believe that it is November 2019 for real. And I am here. And tonight, I've talked about this before, but I'm going to the Neotropolis Bar, a Blade Runner themed pop-up bar that will be here in Los Angeles. I was going to go to preview night on Monday, but I had to work, unfortunately. But I am going tonight because I had bought tickets for this back in July, when the bar was a slightly different bar. They had to change it a little bit, but shouts out to Alcon Entertainment, the owners of Blade Runner, for allowing them to move forward with this bar. I'm very excited. I'm also excited that this show is still brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And for you people, if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com, you can punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity, and you get 20% off your order. I'd also like to direct you to the 6th episode of Living the Lucky Tiger Life that is on the Robservations channel, which I dropped yesterday. It has my movie picks. I kind of intercut my commentary with my favorite picks for the month of November all the way up through November 27th. I go week by week for all the movies that I'm most excited to see. There's a lot more movies coming out that I don't pick, like Frozen 2, which I would say, okay. But, Frozen 2, I had to let it go. So anyway, what can I say? So welcome. I hope you check it out. I had fun doing it. People are like, you should do more of those. Well, maybe I'll do them because I love Lucky Tiger. I love doing my Living a Lucky Tiger Life shows. They're fun to do. And already it's garnered more views than most. And if I can give a shout out to other YouTubers, let's hear it for Jeffree Star and Shane Dawson's launch of the Conspiracy Makeup Palette. Good on those guys. They broke the internet again. Shane Dawson's merch sold out. Now, apparently, the Conspiracy palette is gone too. Love to see. I mean, those two guys, man, they tear it up when it comes to using YouTube for marketing. I aspire to do what they do with the internet, maybe with movies. If I could do for movies what Shane Dawson and Jeffree Star have done for makeup palettes, I think I would really have something. Certainly, Gilbert wants me to do that. Also, two shouts out. Gilbert, please don't bark. Two shouts out to two UK home video companies that I'm a fan of. First of all, Arrow. Arrow put out this gorgeous release of American Werewolf in London. It's a box set, comes with posters and swag and new documentaries and crazy amounts of special features. Really happy to have this. Another killer release from Arrow. And now a company that doesn't get nearly enough love, but I'm going to give it love. The UK's 101 Films has done not quite as well. For this movie, this is like the Tiffany release of this movie. David Cronenberg's second feature, Rabid, starring porn star Marilyn Chambers, who used to be the Downey girl, who later went on to star in Behind the Green Door. They put out Rabid. And they did Rabid as a beautiful, is this right? Yeah, beautiful box set, has a booklet in it, and more new documentaries, new special features that are new to this release. And I really like 101 Films. It's a boutique label they're both out of the UK, actually, but it's a boutique label, and I highly recommend checking stuff out. 101 Films put out last year, Roller Coaster, two versions of Roller Coaster, my beloved Roller Coaster. So shouts out to those guys and gals, everybody that's working at both 101 Films and Arrow. Arrow just kills it. And I can't recommend. I mean, they put out that Candyman box set. They put out the Waterworld box set. Arrow really does a great job. They did the Scarlet box, the Hellraiser box with Hellraiser 1, 2, and 3. They're just delightful. Phantasm, give it up. But anyway, what's the topic of today's conversation? You know what I've been thinking? I actually had a dream the other night. I guess last night. I dreamt that I woke up in a world, or I was living in a world where nobody wanted to make franchise movies anymore. I had this like nightmarish post-apocalyptic world where nobody wanted to work on franchises anymore because why would they? Money isn't enough, right, Gilbert? Why would they? I mean, Gilbert's looking at me like he's barking. He always does this when no one's around to sort of cause him to stop barking. But I guess it's because I've been reading all these articles about what's been going on with franchises, and there's one that I wanted to read that everybody's talking about. Gilbert, no, buddy, you got to stop barking. You're just doing this because Elizabeth is not home right now. So everybody's been talking over the last, well, I mean, when have people not been talking about Star Wars? I talk about Star Trek all the time. Now everyone's screaming about Terminator. Maybe not everybody, but there's a lot of pieces online from a lot of different. So we've got 3 venerable franchises. The Terminator franchise, which was its incept date was in 1984. Star Trek was, of course, created in 1966. Well, it was created earlier, but it didn't air until September 8th, 1966. And of course, Star Wars opened on May 25th, 1977. So these three franchises are decades old. They're decades old, and yet they're still around. People are still making movies. They're still making TV shows. As I pointed out, we are we're 12 days away from the debut of The Mandalorian and 7 weeks of constant new Star Wars. I mean, think about that. Whatever your feelings are, I think most people love Star Wars. When you say Star Wars, it really brings a smile to your face first and foremost. And even the people that have been writing all their hate pieces and think pieces lately about Star Wars, everybody loves Star Wars, I think, for the most part. All of you imagination connoisseurs, everybody loves Star Wars. But Star Wars is 42 years old. Actually, it's 42 and a half years old now. And we are getting, beginning November 12th, we are getting 7 weeks of Star Wars, depending on how much Rise of Skywalker costs. And I've heard upwards of $300 million before marketing, but who knows? Let's just say it does. Let's say Star Wars Rise of Skywalker went as high as $300 million, if not more. That was the budget. Mandalorian is budgeted at $15 million an episode. There's 8 episodes of that. So what is that? If there was 30 million, so it's 120 million. So you got 120 million worth of Mandalorian, right? And then you've got 300 million worth of Rise of Skywalker. So we're getting close to $500 million of new Star Wars in 7 weeks from November 12th through December 27th. This has never happened in the entire 42-year span of the franchise, where we're getting not only, so Rise of Skywalker is the longest Star Wars movie. So we're going to be getting 10 and a half hours, which is a full season of normal Game of Thrones plus a half an hour. It's pretty amazing. So if you love Star Wars, I mean, it's a pretty great time to be around as a Star Wars fan. However, as we all know, there's a lot of vitriol around Star Wars. There's a lot of vitriol around everything. Star Wars, Game of Thrones, Terminator, Star Trek. And I certainly have contributed, I've contributed at least my own bile and hatred of Star Trek Discovery. Although I am holding out hope for Star Trek Picard. Before it disappoints me, I will give it the time of day, and I will watch with an open mind and an open heart. And I hope that it is, in fact, good. But this Vanity Fair article people have been talking about online, I'm going to read it. Benioff and Weiss reportedly left Star Wars, at least in part, due to toxic fandom. This is an article that was written by Laura Bradley, and it dropped on Thursday on Vanity fair. It's on their website. You can check it out. A clearer picture is beginning to emerge regarding why Game of Thrones creators David Benioff and D.B. Weiss opted to abandon their planned Star Wars trilogy. The news of Benioff and Weiss's Star Wars exit broke Monday, not long after the two strangely candid panel at the Austin Film Festival, leaving fans to wonder what exactly prompted the decision. In making the announcement, the two cited their Netflix deal, and according to a new report, that is part of the reason they defected. But the full picture is also reportedly a little more complicated. According to the Hollywood Reporter, Benioff and Weiss's Star Wars exit had been in the works since August. The Hollywood Reporter affirms that the reason the two wound up walking away partially had to do with their Netflix deal, but another factor that prompted the decision, the trade adds, was toxic fandom. As the Hollywood Reporter notes, Benioff and Weiss inked their deal with Lucasfilm in February of 2018, months before the underwhelming debut of Solo, a Star Wars story, and more than a year before their series would round out with a widely maligned final season. Following the Game of Thrones backlash, the two even opted to skip the show's San Diego Comic-Con panel earlier this year. As Benioff and Weiss watched Star Wars fans bully actors and directors, a source told the Hollywood Reporter they began to have doubts about whether they should dip their toes in as well. Who wants to go through that again? Not them, the source said. This was in the life's too short category. The Hollywood Reporter also reports that Lucasfilm head Kathleen Kennedy was not happy that Benioff and Weiss struck a deal with Netflix, as she was not convinced they could create a trilogy they promised Star Wars while also conceiving and overseeing projects for the streaming giant at the same time. Per the Hollywood Reporter, this whole ordeal has only boosted tensions between Disney and Netflix, which have fallen into a rivalry ever since Disney began pulling titles from Netflix in preparation for its own streaming service. Disney, the trade claims, was itself among the studios that initially tried to seal an overall deal with Benioff and Weiss. A source told the Hollywood Reporter that Benioff and Weiss's Netflix deal requires that they exclusively work on the sets of the projects they create during production. That said, another source said Netflix had been prepared to wait for Benioff and Weiss to finish their Star Wars trilogy before they began work on streaming projects. The company reportedly found out about their exit from the project only days before the news went public. Whatever the pair's reason, Lucasfilm now finds itself in a strange position. Its Skywalker saga is about to come to an end with the rise of Skywalker, and with no firm future film plans, all of the galaxy's hope now rests on The Mandalorian. Good luck, Jon Favreau. Representatives for Disney, Netflix, Lucasfilm, and Benioff and Weiss declined to comment when contacted by the Hollywood Reporter. Representatives for those entities did not immediately respond to Vanity Fair's requests for further comment. Now, what struck me about all of this, about Benioff and Weiss's exit, is a reality in the motion picture business, something that I think fans really, when you listen to a lot of fan commentary, remember, you need to take it with a grain of salt, because a lot of the time, fan commentary doesn't have an understanding of how the entertainment business works. And it frequently, it's like fingers on a chalkboard for me when I hear people say things and they don't really know, well, what they're talking about from the inner workings of the business. Now, I'm not saying I'm the Oracle at Delphi when it comes to knowing the entertainment business. I will say that I have been working in the business for 30 years, and I did begin my career working for the senior vice president of production at Warner Brothers. And that was after, of course, my first job as a PA on Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. But here is a reality when it comes to franchise filmmaking. When I say franchise filmmaking, we're talking about movies that cost in $150 million or more. The studios at any one time have a list of about 20 people on the entirety of the planet Earth that are vetted, that they would say are okay, they're acceptable to direct a $150 million plus franchise picture. And that list is always changing. And really, there's less than 20, but on the outside, there's about 20 people, because there are not many people in Hollywood that can consistently deliver these kinds of gigantic entertainments over and over and over again. It is a very rare skill set indeed. And once you get into that rarefied level of filmmaker, you're only there for as long as you do well. And sometimes you might find yourself joining that that echelon of filmmaker only to run into production problems. You might clash with the studio, and then even though the movie comes out, you fall out of favor and you go right back down to the bottom of the pyramid, having to fight and claw your way up, and you might never reach that level ever again. So there is a finite amount of people, indeed a very small pool of people, that are acceptable to work at this level. Now, after what we're seeing, what we as fans are beginning to put people through now on a regular basis when it comes to our fandom. What's really interesting is we have proven that not only do we not have loyalty necessarily to our franchises, we don't even have loyalty to filmmakers that we should be fans of. I'll give you an example. Everybody loved Deadpool. Tim Miller did a fine job making Deadpool. He was there for the long haul. Of course, Tim Miller has his own visual effects company. We know that when he did that long form Injustice, Gods Among Men, or Injustice preview, the Justice League game, that game where there's that long trailer showing the battles between the DC heroes. Everyone loved that. Well, Tim Miller's second feature film opened this weekend. Terminator Dark Fate in the States. It opened a week before. And to read a lot of people like it. I have yet to see it, but a lot of people do like Terminator Dark Fate, but a lot of people hate it. And what's interesting to me, and I tend to watch a lot of these videos. What's interesting to me is I grew up as I'm an auteurist. I love directors. I love film directors. And to me, while a lot of my writer friends object that directors can't make great movies without a great script, that much is true. And some of my favorite filmmakers are true auteurs, where they write and they direct their own movies. But a lot of directors do not. They might work on a script. I mean, Steven Spielberg, it says Steven Spielberg wrote Close Encounters, but for the most part, Spielberg directs other writers' screenplays. But a Steven Spielberg movie is actually and absolutely an auteurist vision. I think nobody would mistake the fact that Steven Spielberg is a very accomplished filmmaker with his own sense of style. And anybody who's ever worked on a movie set understands that the buck stops with the director. The director's vision, you have to have somebody on a movie set that has a vision and knows, because they have to have a holistic version of what this movie is going to be. And sometimes, as we see on these larger studio pictures, sometimes the studio's vision is not necessarily what the director ends up delivering. David Ayer on Suicide Squad comes to mind. David Ayers. And with Suicide Squad, basically the film was taken out of the director's hands and they brought in a trailer company to cut it, which seems to me the height of lunacy, because editing trailers and editing motion pictures is a completely different skill set, even though both are editing. But it got me thinking, this whole thing got me thinking that we as fans are running all of our franchise filmmakers, all of the people that are qualified to make franchise franchise films. We're running these people out of town. Now, look, everybody will, if somebody threw me a $200 million movie to direct, I would say, yes, sir, I will direct that movie, or yes, ma'am, I'll direct that movie. By the way, I'd knock it out of the park. But anybody in Hollywood who's offered the chance to direct a $200 million movie is going to take it. And I think for all of the any criticism the Marvel Cinematic Universe might get, Kevin Feige is one of the things I don't think he gets enough credit for, is how visionary he has been in getting people that were not part of that upper echelon of franchise filmmakers, and he made them into those people. Certainly, Ryan Coogler was not. I mean, even though Creed turned out to be a great entry into the Rocky franchise, and I've often maintained that a guy like Ryan Coogler proved what a great asset he was to franchise filmmaking, because I think Creed is one of the great reinventions of a franchise we've ever seen. Certainly, James Gunn, who had directed Slither and Super, those were movies that were less than $5 million. Who would have thought he could have come on and made Guardians of the Galaxy, which is a $150 million plus film? Well, you know who knew that? Kevin Feige. He's the only one. Well, perhaps not. If we look at Kathleen Kennedy, she's tried to do the same thing that Kevin Feige did. She brought in filmmakers like Colin Trevorrow, who before he had made Jurassic World, he had only made Safety Not Guaranteed, which is $1 million movie. Gareth Edwards, who had done Monsters, of course, and Godzilla. She brought him in, but he had done Godzilla, brought him in to do Rogue One. Lord and Miller, who were cutting their teeth as directors, but they were not up into that upper echelon of directors. She brought them in with less success than Kevin Feige has had. But I think that's because what Marvel has done so well is Marvel has a very synergistic relationship with the filmmakers. Marvel is very upfront. Marvel says, look, we want you to bring, Kevin Feige's like, I want you to bring what you bring, whether it's the Russo brothers, who certainly were not franchise filmmakers before Winter Soldier. But Kevin Feige recognizes these people all have a unique skill set. They have a unique vision. And I want that vision to bring that into the Marvel universe. What Kevin Feige does is he provides enough of a net. He provides enough of an infrastructure and a net and a synergistic relationship with those filmmakers that they are truly working together. And that's why you might think some Marvel movies are better than others. And for the most part, Marvel hasn't had really many missteps with directors. I've heard there's been only maybe even one that they were disappointed in. I'm not sure, but they have really done a great job in nurturing those filmmakers, because Marvel is unique. They're unique because they have Kevin Feige and they have other people, Louis Esposito and people like that are there, that are very experienced, and they know what they want. But the difference is that Kathleen Kennedy doesn't work the same way that Kevin Feige does. And a lot of people have made, somebody's come home and Tallulah's crazy. But it's a different way of making movies. And I think, boy, there's lots happening. But what's really interesting is we as fans, and I'm not saying, by the way, before I mention this, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have our opinions. But what's really interesting is our conduct is, I think, winding up. If you're Tim Miller, all right, and you made Deadpool that everybody loved, and your second movie is Terminator, Dark Fate, you took on a franchise that he took it on before James Cameron was involved. Where is our support? Where's our love for the directors that we appreciate their work and are excited to see them work again in the same genre space, maybe not the same franchise space, but the same overall genre space that, we want to see them work in? Like, for instance, I am a huge John Carpenter fan. John Carpenter is one of the most influential filmmakers in terms of what I wanted. I always said to people that when I was growing up, I wanted to be a cross between Carpenter, Cronenberg, and Stanley Kubrick, whatever that would look like. It hasn't worked out so far yet, but it will. And I remember seeing the first time I ever felt like I was behind John Carpenter all the way. And even when he made movies that I thought They Live was one of his lesser movies, but I still enjoyed it and I was still excited. I still turned out. Escape from LA was the first time that I felt really let down by John Carpenter. And I felt bad. And I didn't want to feel that way. I felt like, you know what? I really didn't like Escape from LA for a number of reasons. And I thought the problem was with me, and I was like, I'm going to support him, and then if we had not just that, but we had Village of the Damned, and but I was always pulling for John. Like, I was never like, "Oh, this movie's gonna suck." It didn't matter because I'm Team Carpenter 100%, and watching him transition over to playing music and then scoring Halloween, and I guess he's scoring Halloween Kills. I mean, hell, if I made another movie, I'd love to get John Carpenter to come in and score it. I think that would be most excellent. But it's very interesting to watch how our fan community is now, we seem to, at least the more vocal of us, especially online, we seem it's almost like we've all fallen over to the dark side. We've given in. Your hate has made you powerful. And I feel like, I guess I feel like I want to be enthusiastic about everything. And if somebody lets me down, I still want to feel like, hey, I'm pulling for you. Now, one of the filmmakers that I've admired since I saw his first movie was Rian Johnson. He made Brick, he made Brothers Bloom, he made Looper, he directed episodes of Breaking Bad that I thought were terrific. So I was always a Rian Johnson fan. Now, of course, he made Last Jedi, and we don't need to rehash because everybody does it every day anyway, where people stand on Rian Johnson. But now that he has Knives Out coming, after seeing the trailers and knowing how it's been received, I'm a huge fan. But a lot of people aren't. Like, I did my video, my Lucky Tiger, Living the Lucky Tiger Life, my November preview, and it ends with Knives Out because Knives Out opens on November 27th. And there's a lot of people, even in the comments section, who have said they want Knives Out to fail because Rian Johnson directed it. And I find that disturbing. First of all, as somebody who knows how movies are made, knows how hard it is to make, it's hard to make any movie. I mean, if you watch Dolomite Is My Name on Netflix, even Rudy Ray Moore with his skeleton film student crew, I mean, he went through, anybody who's ever tried to make any kind of a movie, whether it's a short, knows making movies is very difficult, and it's part of it is alchemy. And it's been interesting to me that up until Last Jedi, nobody had a problem with Rian Johnson. But for the people that feel that Last Jedi was not the Star Wars movie they wanted, suddenly a man who has already created work that we as imagination connoisseurs should love and be behind, particularly Brick and Looper, to see his new effort that looks to be delightful, which has an incredible cast of people. The trailers have all looked great, which is Knives Out. I mean, hell, Captain America and James Bond are in this movie. And to hear that people want it to fail, that they want a world-class filmmaker's movie, and don't forget all of the other hundreds of technicians and people that worked on the movie to make sure it's good, that people want it to fail seems the antithesis of what we should be wanting as fans and as people that want the movie-going ecosystem to move forward and flourish. And it's strange to me. I'm going to read another article, and this was from Deadline today, and this dropped on Deadline at 12 at noon, so 2 hours ago. It's by Fred Topol. And the headline is, Rian Johnson says he's still in talks for more Star Wars, and that angry Last Jedi tweets helped inspire Knives Out. Again, this is on Deadline today. After Rian Johnson made Star Wars The Last Jedi, he faced angry Star Wars fans on Twitter, including some who formed a petition to have Lucasfilms strike Johnson's film from Star Wars canon. Johnson funneled that experience into his new film, Knives Out. The all-star murder mystery has a character, Jacob Thromby, Jaden Martell, who tweets alt-right hate speech online. Anyone who's on Twitter these days, God bless you, because it's rough waters out there, but there's also lots of wonderful stuff about it, Johnson said Saturday at Deadline's The Contenders Los Angeles. That's why we're all still on it, I guess. That's one of the things Knives Out engages with, the current state of online culture. Whether you made a Star Wars movie or you have a cooking show, whatever you're doing on there, someone's going to be screaming at you about it, probably. Let's put it on a screen in a way we can all maybe have a laugh about it. Johnson added that he's still in talks with Lucasfilm to make more Star Wars films, though he had no news about them. We're still engaged with Lucasfilm and we'll wait and see, Johnson said. No updates on it at the moment, but yeah. Inspired by the all-star murder Agatha Christie adaptations, Johnson wanted to set one in modern day with all the technological accoutrements that entails. That meant Knives Out had to incorporate modern technology and the people who use it. What we try and do is place it in the modern day, Johnson said. For me, that meant not just skinning it with cell phones, modern cars, and music. That meant actually plugging it into 2019. We do character types who are slight caricatures of the type Agatha Christie used to do, but with people who, for better or worse, you could only meet in 2019. Well, what's really interesting to me about this is that with Last Jedi, Rian Johnson made over $1 billion. And according to Hollywood, he did okay. Rian entered that upper echelon of franchise filmmakers, and he made a very smart move. He went back and he made a movie that, by all accounts, judging from what I've seen, a lot of it takes place in the same house. So Rian Johnson went from making one of the biggest films you could possibly make to scaling it down and going back to his indie roots that he began with Brick. And also probably he learned about making films quickly on television, working on Breaking Bad. I think we as a group should be behind somebody like Rian Johnson because we want to nurture the careers of filmmakers. We want to see them grow. We want to see them change. We want to see them evolve. We want to see them, one of my favorite directors of the last 20 years has been David Fincher. Well, David Fincher's last movie was Gone Girl. Now he's produced things with Tim Miller. He did, Sex, Death, and Robots for Netflix. But I think a lot of our great filmmakers are reconsidering what it is they want to be doing because of us, because the fans. I mean, it is so hard. I've been working on Tango Shalom for 3.5 years. Now, I didn't direct it, but as a producer and an editor and now the post supervisor, and Gabe Bologna, the director and writer, he directed it, his father co-wrote it. I mean, I can only imagine. It is a movie about a middle-aged rabbi who thinks God told him to dance the tango. Now, most of my audience, most of my constituency is not going to ever go see Tango Shalom and said, that's the greatest movie ever. But for its budget level and for the amount of time, and I've put a lot of myself into this movie over the last couple of years, I am damn proud of the film. Damn proud of it. Now, I don't expect anybody to give me a pass. I mouth off about what's good and what's bad all the time. And I'm willing to put myself out there with Tango Shalom, and I'm willing to say, you know what? For our resources and what we had to work with and what we've done over the last 3 years, I'd put that movie up against any piece of work, and I would say, judge me by this. Judge me by this. I'm perfectly willing to be judged harshly if so, but I'm perfectly willing to put it out and be judged by you. Certainly, I'm willing to put it out and be judged by the entire staff of Star Trek Discovery, even though it cost a fraction of what one episode of Star Trek Discovery costs. But I'm willing to do that, and I would hope that ultimately we want filmmakers to succeed. If we don't like something they've made now, why would we want to take away their ability to do something else, especially when they've done stuff in the past that we've liked? I worry because it's the Emperor Palpatine. Your hate has made you powerful. It's true. It does. It's so easy to hate things because you feel, it's hard to feel anything, first of all, to really feel. But hatred is an easy, seductive emotion because it does make you feel. It's harder to feel joy than it is to feel hate. Luckily, I have a lot of things that give me joy. Like, what gives me joy? I love the paper that sort of heavy matte finish paper, and this is more of a glossy version of it. This is more of a matte finish, but just the fact that they use the paper for this box, that gives me joy. I love it when they do that. I love when I get slip-cased O-rings. I mean, no, these aren't O-rings. This is an O-ring. This is an O-ring. This thing, that's an O-ring. But even this has a cool texture to it. It's got that matte finish. There's so many things in the genre worlds, being a science fiction, fantasy, and horror fan, being an imagination connoisseur, there is so much stuff that gives me joy, whether it's that 0 Hour omnibus, whether it's the paper that they use, that 101 Films used to make the box, the slipcase that Rabid comes in. And I just feel that look, it's one thing. I'm not saying that movies are beyond criticism, because they're not. And I think we should be critical. We should be critical of the work. We should be. And I think you should be critical of the people that are doing the work if the work they're doing is substandard. We should call people out on it. But rather than write them off, I think what's really important is, look, here's my voice online. And look, I'm people are going to come after me and go, Rob, you sometimes tweet directly to the Star Trek Discovery writers room. Star Trek writers, how have you done this? Well, I don't think the Star Trek Discovery writers have done their homework. I don't think they're doing the work they should be doing. Certainly not. It's not evidenced to me that they're doing the kind of work, especially working on Star Trek, because they're trying to turn Star Trek Discovery indeed into something else. But I'm not sitting here going, I'm not going to go, I don't want to watch Star Trek Picard because of it. I want Star Trek Picard to be great. I really do. And even though there's some crossover with the writing staff, and the writing staff, members of that writing staff have let me down repeatedly, I still want Star Trek Picard to be good. I want it to be a great show. I want to love a Star Trek show. It gives me no pleasure not to love something, especially something I've loved my whole life. And I don't want to not love Star Trek. Just like I don't want to not love Star Wars. Like, look, I don't write off Last Jedi. To me, there's been 2 great Star Wars movies, Star Wars and Empire. Since then, everything that's ever come out from Star Wars has, to a certain degree, let me down. Although I will say the Clone Wars, both Clone Wars animated series, did not. I mean, the Clone Wars was a little iffy when it started, but heck, I mean, like I like reading the EU books. I really think the Clone Wars did some amazing Star Wars stuff. And it's too bad that show wasn't a live action show. And I am deliriously excited for The Mandalorian. And as much as, J.J. Abrams has repeatedly let me down. Star Trek 09, Star Trek Into Darkness, Super 8, The Force Awakens. To me, he's proven repeatedly that I don't think he's a great feature filmmaker. However, I want Last Jedi to succeed. Last Jedi. I want The Rise of Skywalker to succeed. I want it to be great. Frankly, like I said on the John Campea show, if that movie really were to end, it strikes me as sort of strange that everybody's reporting these leaks are all confirmed. I don't know if I believe that. I think that there's one piece of business. We know Palpatine's coming back. There's one piece of business that needs to happen in order for The Rise of Skywalker to work. Luke needs to show up and defeat the Emperor with his green lightsaber. And I think, and in doing it, both are destroyed, leaving Rey to take up the mantle to tell the story. Because a lot of people have said, Star Wars is ruined if Rey becomes triumphant. The movie's called The Rise of Skywalker. No, I think it's going to be Luke's turn. Because remember, Luke never did defeat the Emperor. His dad did. And if you talk about this as a generational saga, however, we don't know. It's just assumed Luke disappeared, sure. But it wasn't like he was hit by somebody's lightsaber. He wasn't even there. He did the most Jedi thing ever. He fought a battle that he wasn't even at. And we saw him drift off into the ether. Now, we all assume, okay, he's dead. I don't know why we assume that. But I think that Rise of Skywalker could end with Luke himself coming back to defeat the Emperor. How cool would that be? If that were to happen, it might, I'm not saying it totally would, depending on how it's done, but it certainly would go a long way toward redeeming the the end of the the sequel the sequel trilogy. I have no knowledge of this. But what I would suggest, my hope for all of you imagination connoisseurs, for fandom in general, is let's be a little bit more supportive, because ultimately, at the end of the day, we are going to run out of filmmakers that are studio approved that are even going to take on these franchises unless they're working for, say, Marvel. You know, and Kevin Feige is a kingmaker in terms of directors. He is a kingmaker. But we haven't really seen how Kevin Feige's directing crew has fared. It's going to be really interesting to see James Gunn's Suicide Squad, or The Suicide Squad, to see how he fared outside of Marvel. It'll be interesting to see the Russo brothers. They, of course, to support the Russo brothers, I mean, they had Deadly Class, which I'm sorry to see go. They are also producers on 21 Bridges. That comes out this month. That's one of my picks for November, if you watch my latest video. And I want to see filmmakers flourish. You know, Patty Jenkins, I hope she kills it. I'd love to see F. Gary Gray go on to make more franchise movies. I mean, I want to see Ryan Coogler do a franchise picture outside of Marvel, because I think he is a talented filmmaker as well. I've sung the praises of Creed, and I thought the way you have to pay respect to the way he took a long-running franchise and reinvigorated it with new characters, young actors, and yet still paid respects to what had come before. God, how I wish that Star Trek had somebody like Ryan Coogler, a world-class filmmaker who was also a huge fan, because that's what Star Trek needs more than anything. A world-class filmmaker who's also a huge fan. And hopefully we'll see that after the merger. But I mean, I think that ultimately we need to be supportive of filmmakers. We need to hope that they can build careers and move forward, so we get to watch them develop as people. You know, I'd love to be there at ground zero and watch guys like Rian Johnson have the kind of career Steven Spielberg had, because I think he has it in him. You know, and it would be a shame that look, one of my favorite filmmakers is Martin Brest. I met him. He was one of the first directors I ever met when I was in high school. I interviewed him for my high school newspaper when Beverly Hills Cop came out. And I certainly, you know, Meet Joe Black, Scent of a Woman. And then he made Geely, which was, of course, the J-Lo, Ben Affleck bomb. And he never made a movie again. And to me, that's a damn shame. He was a guy whose films I dearly loved, and then one film took him out of the game. He was gone. He never came back. And I would hate it if we saw filmmakers like, dare I say it, even Weiss and Benioff. And I understand. I hated the 8th season of Game of Thrones, but that doesn't negate the previous 7 seasons or the previous 6 seasons. It's still a monumental accomplishment in television storytelling. And now everyone's taking up arms against them. And I want to see Weiss and Benioff go forward and do something great. Wouldn't it be interesting if they were able to create something else that we could also love as much as we like at least the first 60 hours of Game of Thrones? I mean, they were smart enough to go get those books to get the rights in the first place. And they were smart enough to shepherd as much of that show. I mean, look at Game of Thrones. It's only for me, it was the last 3 episodes that I objected to. That was it. The last 3 episodes of Game of Thrones, not even the entire 8th season. It was just the last 3 episodes, the last 3 hours of the whole series that let me down. I just think that we need to start pulling for filmmakers that we like, rather than be so fickle. There's everybody. Remember, no one is trying to make a bad movie. Now, yes, we are going through an evolutionary period of time where there's we have a lot of new voices in filmmaking, a lot of people that didn't have opportunities before, and that's all good. This whole idea of agenda-driven storytelling is a good thing, as long as it's not the first thing. As I've said, The Burnett axiom: never put your universe before your characters. Never put your agenda or your story. The Burnett axiom is never put your universe before your characters or your story, but never put your agenda before your characters and your story either, because your characters and your story are what endear that story to us. That's what we fall in love with. And your agenda should be self-evident in the story that you're telling, but it shouldn't be didactic. You know, you don't ever want to be that way because no one's going to listen to you. But I do think we need to become at least more supportive of filmmakers. There are things in Last Jedi, whether you liked it overall or not, the scene where in Snoke's throne room on his, I mean, that's a beautiful scene. I would love to have seen more of that, you know, and there are moments in Last Jedi that are worthy of song. And I would hope that we would concentrate on some of those things. Sure. I think one of the things I didn't like about Last Jedi was the modern comedy. I don't think that worked. There's a lot of things that don't work, but I hope all of us run out and see Knives Out. I think it's going to be an enjoyable experience for everybody. I think it's going to be fun. I think the cast is demanding. I mean, my God, what a great group of actors. And don't we want to see them all succeed? Isn't it better to watch people that we like succeed than it is to tear them down? You know, as Spock said, as a matter of cosmic history, it has always been easier to destroy than to create, which he said in Star Trek 2. I just think that we need to be more mindful of the fact that we're surrounded by all of this amazing goodness and some great stuff, especially in the fantasy realm. We're getting his Dark Materials. We had Carnival Row. We had Dark Crystal, Age of Resistance. I mean, it's amazing that we live in this time. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't be critical of it. Not at all. But I think we should just stop and take a breath and concentrate on what is it we want out of life. Do I want Matt Reeves' Batman to be awesome? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I don't think we should ever want people to fail, especially when so many other people are working so hard. Nobody ever tries to make a bad film. Everyone puts their heart and soul into it. I mean, I just read Motherless Brooklyn. It's taken 20 years to see that movie get made. I have a script that I've wanted to make since 1987. I would love to make it. It's too expensive. I'd have to make another movie that was a reasonable hit, or at least it was considered cool on the festival circuit before anybody's going to let me make it. But I've wanted to make it for over 20 years. And it's a script that I dearly adore, and it's a pretty balls to the wall, fantastical story that would not be easy to do well. But I know how to do it because I've been thinking about it for so long. But I just, I would just like to see us become a little bit more supportive of the very people that work on these franchises, because then if we're not, we're going to run out of people that are going to make these franchises. And, I don't know where Star Wars is right now. And like the Vanity Fair article pointed out, maybe Mandalorian's going to be great, but look at who's working on it. Fiercely, Jon Favreau, who doesn't like Jon Favreau, all the way back to Swingers, which he didn't direct, but he wrote. And then all the way up through the Lion King, everybody's pulling for the Mandalorian. We got fan favorites like Dave Filoni working on it as well. Taika Waititi, Bryce Dallas Howard, who I adore, and she's directing. I mean, isn't it better to be pulling for these people? Now, look, if they let us down, call them on it. But that doesn't mean we have to kick them when they're down. Remember Johnny Depp and Ed Wood? Well, my next one will be better. That's what we should hope for these filmmakers. And let's get behind them, because you know what? Even Steven Spielberg made Hook and produced Goonies. Didn't take away from my love of him. I just think we could be a little bit more mindful and maybe a little bit supportive of filmmakers. Anyway, those are just my thought for the day. I now have a ton of letters from you people. I have a ton of super chats. First of all, I missed super chats on Halloween. First of all, John Suntress of the Word Balloon blog. And if you don't listen to John Suntress's Word Balloon podcast, I've been on it a number of times. He has some great people. It's one of the great pop culture podcasts that there is. And he sent me a super chat I forgot to read. And he wrote, "The old radio dramas have many great horror stories. My favorite is Suspense, Donovan's Brain with Orson Welles. It's the same story as the brain that wouldn't die. I didn't know that. Well, John, thank you for that. And the other one I didn't read was from Brian Hepburn, who said the cloud guitar. I was talking about the fact that the Prince estate was selling the cloud guitar, the white guitar, and a blue version of the guitar that Prince had in, I think he had it in or the Raspberry Beret video, and of course he had it, the white one in Purple Rain. And Brian Hepburn says the cloud guitar sold by the estate is not the original. They are Ibanez copies. Handmade from Dave Rusin are the 4K versions. The estate is suing him for trademarks. Oh, I didn't know any of that. I thought that the estate was selling versions that were authorized by the original creator of the cloud guitar. Well, first of all, I want to thank you both for those super chats, and I am sorry that I did not see them back in the day. Orville Nation is here. Orville Nation says, love your content, Robert. Clapping. All right. Well, thank you, Orville Nation. Orville Nation also says Gilbert wants to be the co-host. Gilbert just wants treats, but he does like being on the show. I'm convinced. He's a ham. Willow Yang says, going off the Halloween chat, I've never had a Baby Ruth before. What's the difference between them and Snickers, and which do you prefer? I love these questions. Well, in a Baby Ruth bar, the peanuts are full peanuts. They're not like chopped up, so they're much rockier, and they take up more of the. There's a lot more texture there. It's like it literally is like a rocky road, whereas Snickers is much more of a smooth vibe to it. But they're similar. I think Snickers are more creamy. I think there's more caramel in a Snickers bar than there is in a Baby Ruth. But yeah, I'm a big Baby Ruth fan. It's a texture thing. Just like I love, a lot of people don't like celery, or people say, oh, celery is empty. I love celery, fresh celery, big stalks of it. I love the crunching down on it. Maybe, I don't like slimy things in my mouth. There's some things that are delightful in your mouth, slimy. You know what I'm saying, Vesna? But there are other things like tomatoes. I'm not a big fan of. Not a big fan of tomatoes. I love tomato sauce, but I don't like the interior of tomatoes. But I do like crunchy things, and that's why I like Baby Ruths so much. Dan V900 is here. Don't forget Jedi Fallen Order, which cost at least $100 million to make and will be a 20-hour experience. It should be a good time for those 7 weeks. Well, Dan V900 is correct. Jedi Fallen Order is the new, of course, video game that's coming out. It looks amazing. And I've read some reviews. I've looked at some gameplay videos. It really looks great. Now, the Star Wars games over the years have been hit and miss. I remember, was it Boba Fett or Bounty Hunter that I got for PlayStation 2 that I was totally disappointed by? But then again, The Force Unleashed, I loved. I love that game. And it looks like Jedi Fallen Order has that Force Unleashed feel to it, but of course, better. And I loved Shadows of the Empire. So I'm really happy. I'm hoping that Fallen Order is a great game. It looks incredible. It certainly looks incredible to play, and I can't wait. And there's apparently a lot of world to explore there. So awesome. Magic K says, I just got my Shining Steelbook yesterday. That's a really cool Steelbook. I really like it. And I think it's essential that everybody needs to watch The Shining before they see Dr. Sleep. And look, if you've never seen The Shining and you've seen Ready Player One, what's wrong with you? Dan V900 says it was DC Universe Online, not Injustice. Oh, okay. DC Universe Online. Yes. Boy, I love that video. Thank you for correcting me. Vegetable Tube. Thank you for the super chat, sir. What movie wardrobe would you most want to buy? Ooh, that's a good question. There was a time in my life that I would have said Prince, Purple Rain. No, but I think, you know what? I'll tell you. I might have to go with like Quantum of Solace, because I think it was Quantum of Solace. I'm a huge Tom Ford fiend, and I would love to wear Tom Ford clothes, bespoke clothes. Of course, I'd have to lose about 40 or 50 pounds, basically just become tight, the way I used to look when I was pretty. Even 10 years ago when I worked out with a trainer, I weighed about 195 in high school. I got down to 200 pounds. And it was great. I enjoyed that, but you have to look good. But yeah, I'd want to wear like Tom Ford Tom Ford clothes. So probably, yeah, one of the Daniel Craig Bond films. I think it was Quantum. He might have come on earlier, but other than that, I think another movie wardrobe that might be cool. Of course, Blade Runner. Just to go to the bar tonight to be decked out in Blade Runner wear. But yeah, that's probably it. You know what though? I kind of like the suits that Paul Reiser wore in Aliens with this weird turned up collars. I kind of like that too. Timula the Spider Monkey's here. I just got my Absolute Arkham Asylum. It's beautiful. Yes, I have that right here. It is fantastic. I love the Absolute versions. They're so great. Rick Berg said Yoda did the same when he died in Jedi. Yeah, but he died of old age. I mean, what did Luke die of? Exhaustion? Exertion? I mean, Yoda was old and frail. He'd been alive for hundreds, 1,000 years almost. So yeah, he disappeared, but he was clearly old and infirm, whereas Luke was not. So, we really don't know. If you just go by Star Wars movies, I know a lot has been written on a bunch of different places, but we'll see. Do It for Cash says people who berate and accost creators clearly haven't learned any life lessons watching Star Wars and don't deserve to be considered a part of fandom. Well, Do It for Cash. Here's the thing. There's a lot of, on one hand, I would agree that going after creators for making things, we fans are a fickle bunch. We are. But it's really difficult to create something. It really is. It doesn't matter what you're creating, but creating anything is difficult. So it's just strange to me that there is, I mean, that in the online world, it is easier to go after people than to prop them up because it makes you feel better. It puts you in a position of that your opinion, that by getting out there, you feel good you're getting one over on somebody by saying something like that. And I understand that. I mean, I do. I really do. There's a lot of people in the entertainment business. I got a letter just yesterday from somebody who was trying to get me to come back to work with them and said it's not like someone's knocking on your door. And what's interesting about that is that person means that, oh, what? You're not directing a Hollywood feature right now. No, but I have plenty of work, plenty of things in progress. And you never know where they're going to lead you. So I've always got something going on, but I would never feel the need. If I was trying to work with somebody, my approach would not be to say, hey, bro, you're not really doing anything right now. So why don't we go work on something? That's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to say to someone, you know what? I've really liked your work in the past. And if we've worked together in the past as well, we've done a lot of great stuff together. So why don't we go do great stuff now? You wouldn't sit there and go, I noticed you're sitting on your ass, not doing anything. So why don't we go back and work together? I'm like, perhaps your approach is why we're not working together anymore at all in the first place or whatever. So anyway, but yeah, I again, Kelly Marie Tran is the one that freaks me out the most, that anybody would go after her. I mean, she was totally, as John Schnepp would say, a total sweaty, total nerd, just like any of us, who was living the nerd dream by getting cast in a Star Wars movie. And I would think that all of us would be pulling for her. The idea that somebody went after her at all just boggles my mind. I mean, look, it's not her fault that Rose Tico might not have been written the way you wanted her to be written, or that maybe her plot line in Last Jedi seemed to be extraneous. But still, she was still living the dream. Like, my God, just reading about how she got the role and what she went through, I'm a huge Kelly Marie Tran fan, and I was grateful to see her back in a trailer for Rise of Skywalker. I hope she gets to ride horses and take someone's head off with a sword, because that would be great. But yeah, it's a strange thing. Stubble McShave says filmmakers like Feige and Peter Jackson, who are intimately familiar with the franchise, knows which things can be changed without losing the soul of it. Well, Stubble, I have said that, but remember, people turned on Peter Jackson with The Hobbit. Now, Now, in a way, I can understand that. I mean, turning a book that could have been done in one movie into 3 giant films might not have been the way to go, might not have been the best way to go. I ultimately like the Hobbit movies. I really enjoy the experience of watching them because there's so much imagination on display. I think tonally they're a little bit all over the place. But I think you're right. I think the problem is um, we have a lot of filmmakers and a lot of whether you're in television or whether you're working in movies, when you come aboard these franchises, you're going about it the wrong way. You're thinking, how can I change this franchise and make it more the way I want it to be, rather than honor what came before and honor why the franchise worked and try and continue on and add to it rather than change it. And I see that going on. A lot of people, I keep going back to the Damon Lindelof interview he did with Frosty from Collider. And there was a lot of insight. I encourage everybody to go watch Lindelof's interview on Collider with Frosty, and listen to what he's saying, because it was fascinating to me. I learned a lot about television writers, the mindset of television writers today. And right now, the first 2 episodes of Watchmen have me deeply confused. I'm not hate watching it yet. I'm more perplexed by the direction they've gone in. I'm curious to see where it's going to wind up. And I really like Regina King. So far, I really can't stand the Adrian Veidt portrayal at all. I hate it. But we'll see where it's going to go. Maybe it'll be redeemed. I mean, another franchise that I love, and people don't think of it as a franchise, but I love Jack Ryan. I love Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. We had 5 Jack Ryan feature films. I thought the last one with Shadow Recruit was not good. But we did have, of course, Hunt for Red October, Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger, Sum of All Fears. And I really liked the first season of Amazon's Jack Ryan series. And I've quite enjoyed the second season. I have one more episode to go. I haven't liked it as much. And I think what's really interesting, they leaned heavily into the movies. There's a whole plot point that was there's an action sequence, and then there's an entire plot thread that was lifted right out of Clear and Present Danger, which I can understand, because one of my favorite reinventions of any franchise was what Brian Fuller did with the Thomas Harris books, which I loved. I love what he did with Hannibal. I mean, I thought that's the way to both honor a franchise and make it new again. So, really, really enjoyed that in terms of going about a franchise. I thought that was certainly a way to do it. Speaking of Weiss and Benioff, Ian Samuels is here. Ian Samuels wrote a letter. No one had heard of Benioff and Weiss before Game of Thrones, and these 2 newbies had the biggest hit ever on their hands. Well, they weren't. Benioff wasn't exactly a newbie. He was a novelist. The 25th Hour was made by Spike Lee. Then they got offered a Star Wars trilogy and a $45 million deal. No, it was a $250 million deal with Netflix. Then they went on Twitter and told all. It turns out that they blagged their way through the whole thing. They admitted that they had not read the books and threw together a pilot that was half the length that HBO wanted, and they had no idea how to write and how to develop characters. But HBO just gave them more money and told them to do it again. So they learned on the job. They learned how to write. They learned about characters and the costumes and a lot of other things on the job. They also admitted that they didn't care. They didn't care about the viewers, and they didn't care about the art. The next day, Disney announces Benioff and Weiss won't be doing Star Wars. The reason they gave was that Benioff and Weiss have a deal with Netflix. They will be too busy. So Benioff and Weiss have admitted that they're bad writers and didn't care. Well, context is everything, and they didn't exactly say that. There are many writers who write for TV that do not get the same opportunity as they did, and to admit that you didn't care or were bad at your job is an insult to all those writers struggling to find work in the industry. As for Star Wars, the only thing I have to say to Kathleen Kennedy is this. Why is it the only white men you have sought out to make Star Wars? Surely there are plenty of women and people of color who have a Star Wars story to tell. Why aren't you giving them a chance? Ian Samuels. Well, first of all, the Weiss and Ben, no one doesn't care. It's you spend way too long working on TV and movies to not care. I think there was an element of they were being self-deprecating that is not being taken into consideration. But I will say this when it comes to um, hiring practices in Hollywood. If there was an equal amount of people, for instance, let's say you had 100 people, and uh, of that demographic of 100 people, if the demographic falls down racial lines in this country, first of all, let's just say it's 50-50 men and women, okay? And then people of color, what is it? You've got 15% of the population in the United States are black, and then it goes down from there. It's not as if there is an equal amount of everybody trying to work in Hollywood. And if you look at how many people of those 20 people I talked about earlier who are working at the studio level, there's more people of color and there's more women than ever before. Now, does that mean that we can't have more? Certainly not. I've been an advocate of more of voices. The more voices we get, what do I say at the end of every show? The more people everyone has a story to tell, you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. The more diversity of people's lives, backgrounds, experiences, the more diversity of experience, and that comes from being people of color or being LGBTQ or being those experiences of living in the world are like, if you want to make a movie about outcasts or you want to make a movie, whatever you want to make a movie about, the more diverse your experience in life, the more you can bring to a project. So I'm all for it. I think it's only going to bring us better stories, but it's not like there's equal distribution of people that want to try making movies. There just isn't. And nowadays, sure, a lot of people want to step up and try and make a Star Wars movie, but right now, how many people? It's funny because you think about it. F. Gary Gray, who did Fate of the Furious, Ryan Coogler, Patty Jenkins. They've tapped an Asian director to make Shang-Chi. So it's happening. It's especially over at the MCU. I mean, things are happening there, and more diversity is coming along. But if you think about how many people work in the movie business that want to look, everybody wants to direct. Everybody wants to direct. Even people that aren't in the movie business want to direct. But the people that work on that rarefied level, there's not a lot of them. So, and there's more different voices at that level than there's ever been before. Does that mean there needs to be there doesn't need to be more? No, the more the merrier. The better off we're going to be. But I think Weiss and Benioff did have experience, especially Benioff before. But yeah, I mean it's interesting. It's tough. It's a tough world out there. Speaking of more, this one comes from Dieter Bastian. Dieter says, "Greetings, Rob Dieter here. I just wanted to write you about my disappointment with Terminator Dark Fate yesterday because I have to reference the Viceroy of Verisimilitude. The movie is to me like Star Wars The Force Awakens was to you. Perhaps not a cover band. Instead, let us say it's like one of those old bands that are still touring even if they should have stopped a long time ago. They're trying to play their greatest hits, but don't hit the correct notes very often story-wise, and hoping that the computer behind the stage will somehow fix it. Unfortunately, the CGI settings are in Fast and the Furious mode, which for a Terminator movie just doesn't fit, or, as you would say, has no verisimilitude. Since the trailer for Genesis spoiled the whole movie, but nevertheless, I even had fun with that one, I am happy to report that there is actually nothing big to spoil in Dark Fate, except what happens in the first 2 minutes, and then it's paint by numbers. And even if someone would consider this a spoiler, but I have to get it out, a family Terminator? This was just stupid as hell. Everyone's raving about Linda Hamilton back as Sarah Connor, but could she have possibly been more one note than here? I guess not. You warned me before, Rob. You said the story had already run its course a long time ago. But as stubborn as I am, I had to see it for myself. The best Terminator movie since Judgment Day is what I was told from YouTube and company. I beg to differ. This was the worst of all of the sequels. Rise of the Machines had a kick-ass ending, good action, and the humor worked for me. Salvation, even as forgettable as the movie is for me, at least we got some deeper look on the future of war against machines. I actually kind of like Salvation. And I would rather have loved to see a continuation of Genesis, which I totally enjoyed, than this pile of garbage. At least they were trying a new take on it, and the Terminator was laying low while Sarah and Kyle were time traveling and didn't have the urge to start a family. So to me, why Terminator Dark Fate is shaping up to be a flop is clear. The movie is simply not good. End of story, and perhaps the IP as well. Rob, resistance to your show is futile, so live long and prosper. Dieter B. P.S. As Gilbert gets to snatch some cookies every show, you should know exactly what my cookie is. You sang Germany in actual German. Deutschland. And by the way, doing a fine job, sir. So, Rob, I need my cookie. Deutschland. Deutschland über alles. First of all, Dieter, I want to thank you for writing in and being a longtime member of the Post-Geek Singularity community. It's always good to hear from you all the way over from Germany. I love the fact that this show has and the John Campea show too. I love how John always says, welcome to our international audience. I like having an international audience. I think it's great. And it's a great honor. Look, I think that the Terminator franchise it's just a franchise that only goes so far. They've only given us, I liked Salvation for the reason that you cited. We got a really interesting look at the future war. And that to me is the most interesting part of the Terminator franchise. But this idea of Terminators coming back through time to kill the ancestors of the future leaders of the resistance, that was interesting once, and then maybe a second time. But why don't the Terminators go back further? Just like, why did the Borg not? If you're playing with a time travel concept, in what we've already seen with time travel throughout, if you're a genre fan, even the great time travel movies, I mean, God forbid, Back to the Future is 34 years old this year. Time travel has been done to death. We've seen, look, you want to see a great time travel movie? Predestination with Ethan Hawke. If you guys haven't seen Predestination, it's based on a Robert Heinlein story called All You Zombies. It's pretty interesting. It's probably the most interesting time travel movie. Somebody brought up Time Crimes, the Spanish film Time Crimes. If you haven't seen Time Crimes, to me, Predestination, Time Crimes, and Primer are my favorite time travel movies of the last, I guess, 20 years. The Terminator premise is just, you're not taking it anywhere interesting. You have to make it intellectually interesting for somebody to want to go out and see it. Like, what are you going to show me that's different? One of the great things about the world that we live in now, I think, is that there's so much great content. You know, whether I'm watching the new Jack Ryan show, we got The Expanse coming out, we got The Mandalorian starting. And to me, The Mandalorian's interesting because one of the great things about the Star Wars universe is the Burnett axiom is never put your universe before your characters or your story. What's great about the Star Wars universe is that we have the universe already. So the universe has been defined, whether it's the EU, whether it's the movies, whether it's Clone Wars or the other animated shows that have come out, whether it's video games, whether it's the visual dictionary, the universe is there. And it's already so rich and defined. One of the great things in my mind about working in the Star Wars universe is we want to explore every facet of it. That's why the idea that the Skywalker saga is over it says to me like, well, great. Okay, that story. Let's go see something else. I mean, The Mandalorian is really the first time where we've moved away from all of it. Because even the things that we've seen has been peripherally tied back to Star Wars, the original movies. The Mandalorian, is the first time we've really seen Star Wars. It's not only is it the first live action show, but it's in another part of the universe. You know, it's dealing where we're not it's not about necessarily the rebellion. It's about the world outside of that. Sure, we're going to see remnants of the empire. We're going to see remnants of the rebellion, I'm sure, but we're really going to it's such a rich universe to explore. You can create almost any kind of characters and story. Phil and Dan and the modal nodes. I said, wouldn't it be great to see like a show about a down in their luck band, the Cantina band that we saw in Star Wars, and maybe after the fall of the Empire, you see them trying to make it. It's like almost famous in the Star Wars universe. People might laugh at me, but you've got the Star Wars universe. You could explore any facet of it. It would be really interesting. I mean, that's what I find so strange is everybody wants to go back. Like, why does Terminator have to be exactly the same all the time? Like, look, the Sarah Connor Chronicles did it pretty well. It was gone before its time, but I understand what you're saying. I mean, I have not seen Dark Fate yet. I'm going to go see it this weekend. I want it to be good, but the question that I'm asking is, why do we need to see another variation on literally the same story? The details might be different, but why do we need to see that again? It doesn't make sense to me. There's not enough intellectually there. And it might be a fun ride. There's lots of people that are going to like it. But if it doesn't do enough, then why make that movie? But again, I'm pulling for it because I want Tim Miller to succeed. I do. I want him to succeed. I think he's a great filmmaker. This is a pretty funny letter. This comes from Mark C., my man Mark Chure, who's here a lot, one of the old school, old time members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. Hey man, we're coming up. We're gonna be a year old in less than 2 months. So it's pretty exciting. This is a very funny letter. Greetings, Rob. I just wanted to start this letter with a fuck you to YouTube. Currently, for me to get a super chat through, I have to be dedicated. If I keep at one message, I might be able to get it to go through, retrying and resending for about half an hour. I've asked around, and it's not just me. If you and Campia have noticed a drop in messages, this is why. That's really interesting. I have noticed a drop in messages. I don't know why. That's weird. I wanted to start by addressing a few things that's happened on the John Campia show. First was Halloween Thursday. I've heard some epic rants from John, but Aaron's rant about Kathleen Kennedy vetting creative and comparing it to a sexual relationship may be the greatest thing to ever hit YouTube. Well, Mark, I saw that as well. I'm sorry I wasn't on that episode, but it was fantastic. You got to love Erin Cummings. Not only is she a good actress, she's just a firecracker in person, one of my favorite people. The second happened on Friday, November 1st. After 45 minutes of trying, I finally got my super chat to go through, only to have Campia misread it. The greatest Drew Struzan poster is not Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, but the teaser poster of the same movie. Struzan is known for capturing likenesses, but this one is simply stunning. It is simply stunning. It is a great poster. You know what? I'm not a big fan of the final poster for Last Crusade. It's a riff on Amsel's poster for Raiders, but I didn't like it as much. The reason for my letter is to find new ways for you to be the reason for my letter is to find new ways for you to part with your hard-earned cash. When it comes to kaiju, hot toys are laughable. My son has found a new way for you and me to spend money and has decided it's okay if I live under a bridge eating canned cat food, as long as I can buy him the giant Godzilla made by X Plus. I don't know how to explain to a 10-year-old that for the price of that figure, daddy can spend a good chunk of a night with a pretty good prostitute or 45 minutes where anything goes. Considering your love of all things Godzilla and high-end figures, I recommend you check them out. For this letter, I would like to end on a question to you, Rob. Have you ever bought a second copy of a movie just because it had cool box art? Thank you, Mark C. Well, Mark, first of all, X Plus is amazing. I had one of the coolest X Plus things ever. It was Ghidorah and Godzilla, and you put them together, and it was huge. For those of you who don't know, X Plus is a Japanese company that makes Godzillas, and they're very expensive. They're usually made out of resin or some polystone or something like that. They're huge and they're expensive and they're awesome. And I love them. And yeah, they can be a lot more money than Hot Toys. But look them up. They've been making X Plus has been making Godzilla stuff for like 20 years. And they've made some really, really great things. I have owned two. I had that set, the Godzilla King Ghidorah set, and oh my God, was it awesome. And I loved it. It actually got stolen out of an old apartment of mine. Stolen. Believe it or not, it did. But I had it for years, so I enjoyed it. So whoever stole it and sold it, whatever they did with it, I'm glad somebody's enjoying it now. But it was a very cool thing. But X Plus, man, they are awesome. As my girlfriend Elizabeth will tell you, and she constantly berates me about the fact that I have multiple copies of, well, Blu-rays or 4K discs. And yes, I have bought many discs a second time because of either the steelbook, the O-ring, or something, the new artwork, all the time. But usually those purchases are driven by more special features. But yes, I love to to get new copies of things. It's ridiculous though. It's gotten to the point where it's really just silly. Timbula the Spider Monkey is back. For years, we cried out for our franchises to be taken seriously. Now we've got that and world-class creators lining up to make them. And what happens? I know, man. I know. I don't understand. What's really interesting is, I guess it's because I'm a little older. As I've said, I'm an old man with one foot in the grave. But I remember when we had no franchises, and when franchises, like, I guess when you've grown up with Planet of the Apes, when I was a kid, we're talking pre-Star Wars, yo. Star Trek was only on television. The franchises that I loved were James Bond and Planet of the Apes. Now, by the time I was paying attention to Planet of the Apes, there was already 5 Planet of the Apes movies. Now, clearly, the first Planet of the Apes is in a class by itself, but I'll tell you a secret. I love all the Planet of the Apes movies. Is Battle for the Planet of the Apes as good? No. They didn't have the kind of money. Is Beneath the Planet of the Apes? I mean, Beneath the Planet of the Apes is so goofy. You have mutants that worship a nuclear bomb. Well, it's not even a nuclear bomb. It's like a doomsday bomb, the Alpha Omega bomb or whatever. But I love it. But even I, as a kid, could be like, oh, okay, well, the Planet of the Apes franchise, talk about so many different kinds of movies within that one franchise. But really, the only one that I didn't love as much was Battle, because it was so cheap. But I had a Power Record. Power Record presents. I'd listen to the story of Battle. You'd read along with the Battle for the Planet of the Apes comic book, and I love Battle for the Planet of the Apes for that reason. But I understood that not all movies in a franchise were going to satisfy me. So I had Planet of the Apes as a kid, and James Bond movies were always hit and miss for me. Not all of them were great, but I love James Bond. So I guess that's why I find lesser entries into franchises a little bit more palatable than the audiences of today, because now it's like everybody expects every franchise entry to be genius, to be the best thing ever. And it's strange. I mean, when you've grown up with slasher movies, like, I think the Friday the 13th franchise has one good movie in it, really, and that's the first one. I mean, does that mean that Friday the 13th Part 3D wasn't hilarious to see in a theater? No. Did it bother me that Friday the 13th Part 2 was heavily edited? The gore was edited? No. But I grew up in a world where not every franchise entry was really great. The Nightmare on Elm Street franchise was more interesting to me than all of the other slasher franchises because of the fantasy-based nature of it, the mayhem that Freddy Krueger would cause. So it's just interesting to me that now everybody expects every franchise entry to, I don't know, shine the light of God on them so everybody sees Jesus. I don't know. I mean, it's so weird that everybody wants everything to be perfect, but everything isn't perfect. I mean, it's all, well, maybe, like, I hated Spectre. I really did. It's beautifully made. It was just boring and nothing really interesting happened. Bond went into the snow and didn't strap skis on. It was very disappointing. But, you know, they spent probably the most expensive James Bond movie. I don't know what Bond 25's budget is. It's probably even more expensive. But that has not diminished my excitement for Bond 25 in the least. Because after 25 Bond movies, there's probably like 8 that I think are really good. There's probably 10 that I think are pretty good, and then the rest are not so good. But I still love the whole Bond franchise. I don't understand why we don't have that mindset. Like, oh, well, it was disappointing. I hope Rise of Skywalker is better. Victory Unlimited Show is here, ladies and gentlemen. Victory Unlimited Show. Victory Unlimited Show says toxic fandom isn't new. A sense of ownership that fans feel toward their favorite franchises can become unhealthy. Remember, the word fan is short for fanatic. Question: what amount of service do filmmakers owe to fans? Well, I don't think filmmakers owe anything to fans. I think what filmmakers owe is they owe an allegiance and a fealty to the franchise format that they are working within. And I think, for instance, as a fan, I like to be challenged and delighted by new decisions that filmmakers are making as far as my favorite franchises go. I like it when things surprise me. I like when I'm like, huh, I never thought of that. I mean, I love it when, look, I love Deep Space Nine, and when you saw an episode like The Visitor, or even Next Generation, The Inner Light, these were off-brand episodes, and they delighted me to no end. You want more. People might not realize it, but you want to be excited by filmmakers doing something new and different. But the only way to do something new and different is if you already understand the franchise. You can't come in and go, like, I really feel like what drives me berserk about Star Trek is I thought that Deep Space Nine, in terms of inclusion, was one of the best television shows I've ever seen, but no one ever said it was about that. They just went and did it. And Star Trek Discovery was being billed. I thought this is one of the things about Star Trek Discovery that has completely let me down. I thought it would have been really interesting to have a Star Trek series focused on the first officer, that what Michael Burnham was. And what is that like? What is it like to see? And I thought if I had made a Star Trek show, I would have made it more along the lines of The West Wing, where the president was a main character. Sure. But the show is about everybody else that makes the White House work. And I thought Star Trek Discovery was going to be a canonical show set 10 years before Kirk and Spock, but we were going to see the support staff focused on as opposed to the captain. Now, the fact that a black woman would be front and center, to me, that would have been immaterial. It would have been great, but what they did instead was, not only did they not do that, they made this character, this woman, where the entire universe surrounds her. And it's not an ensemble show, and it's not a show where we see people working together. One of the great things about, I think, The West Wing is, whether you like it politically or not, I really like that there was a group of characters that were all trying to do good. They weren't on a starship, but they were in the White House, and they were dealing. The White House might as well have been in a starship traveling around. That's kind of what I was hoping. Now, that is me projecting onto what kind of a show that I would have done. But the same was true. I mean, I would have said, if somebody came to me and said, Rob, aside from the fact that my Star Trek Federation proposal that we put out there in 2005 looks to be the basis of the new season of Discovery. But by the way, I don't know if that's true or not. Although I did hear that, by the way, before people made those comparisons, I do want to say that I was told by somebody that was the case over a year ago, before I knew where they were going with Star Trek Discovery. But so it's interesting to see that. But I think that what I've never understood, and I guess it's the funny thing about all of this, is that when you're looking to tell a great Star Trek story, and this is true of the original series, you looked towards other things that were not Star Trek. Like, for instance, a submarine movie like Run Silent, Run Deep becomes the basis of an episode like Balance of Terror. And Star Trek was always allegorical in nature, where you were taking other things and transposing them to the Star Trek universe. What I thought was unfortunate about what they did with Star Trek Discovery was, so they take the idea of an evil AI, which is, by the way, I won't get into David Mack's Star Trek novel, his Section 31 Star Trek novel, Control. I mean, you read that book and you're like, oh my God, he was never even acknowledged for any of this. But the evil AI that they show us in Star Trek Discovery in the second season is the most outdated, ridiculous idea of an AI. We've seen that 50 years ago. That might have been something groundbreaking, but we've seen it how many times? And I just thought it was bad and rudimentary science fiction. It wasn't interesting. And you could have done something far more interesting with AI, and they've done that throughout Star Trek history. And I think Discovery was the most. It took Star Trek science fiction and Star Trek. It took it back 50 years, and that's why I objected to that. So what's unfortunate to me is that I want these filmmakers to come into Star Trek and feel rather than feel uh, uh, they need to worry about the franchise first. The fans are going to be there. We're going to watch things. We're going to come and we're going to watch them anyway. What you owe fans and what you owe your audience is, once again, a great story with great characters. And what I found lacking in Star Trek Discovery is the storytelling, even more so than how they've handled Michael Burnham being the center of the universe. I found the stories to be really nonsensical, and it's like no one ever. Star Trek is inherently a literary genre. It's a literary genre. It always has been. It's a genre of ideas, and I feel like no one writing on Star Trek Discovery is reading modern science fiction, or is coming up with any. There was a I posted for Halloween on my Facebook page the story of. I'm fascinated by the Fermi paradox and the Drake equation, and the idea that our universe should be teeming with aliens, yet it's not. Well, there was an idea put forth in a book by Charles Pellegrino. Charles Pellegrino was the scientist who came up with the idea of mosquitoes and amber having blood that you could later use to clone dinosaurs. They use that for Jurassic Park. Well, there's a couple of really interesting books, but Charles Pellegrino had a theory about why we don't know or don't want to know other alien species. And they were talking about anybody that had faster than light travel. And the fact that if species that had near faster than light or near faster than light travel would be the most dangerous group of species ever, because if they found us, we are an emerging species. Look at how human beings look at other animals. Like, we exist on our own planet, or look at how other animals, how predators go after their prey. Well, who's to say that a sentient race that had almost faster than light travel, why would they look upon us as necessarily an equal intelligent species? Just look at how we treat the other animals on the planet. Like, I live with dogs, and I know Gilbert, for instance, is an incredibly smart dog. I know he's very, very smart, but he's not as smart as I am. And so, or maybe he is, I don't know. He certainly gets me to give him cookies. But so why would an alien race that was far more advanced than we are, why would they care what we're doing? Why would they want to meet us? We want to believe that if they're a million years more advanced than we are technologically, how does that make them any different? Why would they treat us differently than we treat other animals on this planet? We know that whales, we know that dolphins, and we know that certain primates and other animals, elephants, are intelligent. We have seen examples of primates who have made it to the Stone Age, where they are manipulating tools the same way that our ancestors were. But will we ever consider, like, we can't talk to them? So I posted this thing from Charles Pellegrino's book that said that any species that could travel faster than light or close to faster than light, all they'd have to use, and this goes back to Star Wars: The Last Jedi, is to send a kinetic weapon that weighs as much as a space shuttle and flying at near speed of light velocities. One kinetic weapon that weighs 1,500 tons or something like that could take out our Earth. And it was because what's the incentive? What's the incentive for anybody who's out there? Why would they want them? Because there's other species that could be, I don't know. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but it comes back down to, I do think ultimately victory is that we the writers of franchises, I think, owe the franchises and the fans, they need to do the research. It's not just a job. And Kevin Feige has set the tone. Kevin Feige has proven that franchise filmmakers, beginning with him, can work and honor the franchise that they're in. I think that's the most important way to do it. And look at the success he's had, because Kevin Feige produced or worked as a working producer on 13 Marvel movies before the MCU started. He saw what worked. He was obviously a fanboy. He worked for Richard Donner first, the director of Superman the movie. He cut his teeth. He saw how to make these franchises, how to make things work, how to make things what did work and what didn't. And that's what he's asked of his filmmakers. They don't put the filmmakers before the films or the franchise. The franchise comes first. The franchise comes first. And then you have to do that. And then the fans will show up. Fan service is fine. But you have to know the franchise in and out before you step in to working in it. And I think with Star Trek, I don't see that. I just don't see it. But once again, Victory, thanks for supporting the channel the way you do. Suthius is here. Suthius says, hey, Mr. B, speaking of Jack Ryan, I'm loving this action side of Krasinski. He's awesome. Just watched 13 hours and I quite enjoyed it. Intense scenes. Bay does it well. 13 hours. Yeah. 13 hours, the Benghazi movie, right? Yeah, he does it well too. But I really like Krasinski as Jack Ryan. I really do. Eddie D says, Neon Genesis Evangelion Hot Toys, where art thou? Well, there are quite a few very cool Neon Genesis Evangelion toys. Metacom has made them. I've got a few Metacom hot toys. They're not hot toys. Metacom Real Action Hero Evangelion toys. They're about like this. And then there's a lot of great die-cast Soul of Chigokin. There's a lot of great die-cast Evangelion toys as well that are expensive, but you can get them. But I'd love to get a Neon Genesis Evangelion. I would like to get an Ava. I'd like to get all the Avas. Hell, I'd like to get Angels as well. That would be a good thing, Eddie. I would be into that, because why not? More things to buy? My God, I'm in. Willow Yang says, confession, I still have yet to see Joker. Well, what? I'm glad you're going tomorrow. You got to check it out. You got to report back. No. Better yet, I expect a Willow Yang review for Willow Talk. If you haven't been to the Burnettwork website, go to the website. That's where you can send me letters. Maxter248 says, ever seen Coherence? Heard it was mostly ad-libbed. Okay, I love Coherence. Coherence is a really interesting film. It's a science fiction film that the less you know about it, the better. But yes, here's what I understand about Coherence. Coherence it's a science fiction film that begins at a dinner party. And apparently a comet is flying overhead at the dinner party, and all the lights go out and flicker on. And then the people at the dinner party, some of them venture out, and they discover that there is a duplicate of the house that they're at. And inside this duplicate are them having the same kind of dinner party, as if the universe has split into two, or there's a mirror universe, but they can go interact with that other mirror universe. And to me, it's one of the most brilliant, low-budget science fiction films made in the last 20 years. And here's what I understand about what they did. And Nicholas, Xander from Buffy is in it. And how they made it, at least how I understand they made it, is the directors, I think there's two directors, they wrote a treatment. They had like a 15-page treatment, and it was ad-lib. But what they would do is for each scene, they would tell the actors, like, I'll give you an example. So a door's locked, and one actor is outside, and they're trying to get in. And then there's the actors inside that don't know if they should let the actor in. So the character in. So what the director said to do was they tell the actor outside, look, you have to figure out a way. You have to try and convince them through talking to let them in, to have them let you in. And then the other actors on the other side of the door, the directors would say, whatever happens, don't let that person in. And they would shoot those scenes. So it was like an improv acting exercise. They had it plotted out, so they knew where they wanted it to go. But it was improv, mostly improv, based on a scenario, which I think is a really interesting way to make a film. You still have to kind of know where it goes, but coherence, as a matter of fact, if you guys, coherence, you got to watch it. Now, I'm not saying it's the greatest movie in the world, and some of the camera work, there's a scene kind of in the at the dinner party in the opening that drives me crazy, because when people are ad-libbing, the camera doesn't quite know where to go and who to watch. So the camera work is sketchy, because how would they know? When you're all improvising, you don't know who's going to talk. So the camera work sometimes gets a little annoying. But if you know going in what's happening, it's really fun. And I really, really liked it. And as far as I've wanted to make a movie like Coherence ever since I saw it. And if you like Coherence, if I might recommend another series of movies by a filmmaking duo, their new movie's playing at the festival circuit now, but they made a movie called Resolution and the Endless. Don't read, and if you don't know anything about them, don't read anything about them. Don't. The less you know, the better. And again, these are ultra low budget movies, and they require an attention span. And then the same guys made a movie called Spring that I also highly recommend, which is more of a horror film. But if you want to see a pretty interesting science fiction movie, if you like Coherence and you want to see something along those lines and you dug it, go watch Resolution and then watch The Endless, and watch them back to back as a double feature. But yeah, I'm a big fan of those movies. Yes, they're good. Lewis Yu is here. One of our Lewis Yu we have two new moderators here on Robservations. Lewis Yu is one of them. And of course, we also have Jordy Lyons. Welcome them. They're new, but they've jumped right into the fray and they've done a great job. So yeah, how about that? Let's see. I got more letters. I got so many letters to catch up on. I have so many letters. My God. This next letter, I always get the last name wrong. Josh Rozalkis. Josh Rozalkis is here. By the way, if you haven't watched the Josh Rozalkis show on YouTube, he is a longtime member of the Post-Geek Singularity community. He has started his own show. Shout out to Josh. Hello, Rob, and my fellow members of the Post-Geek Singularity as well. As you know from my last letter, I'm currently rewatching The Next Generation. Something, by the way, that I try to make time to do every year. I got to thinking about something which I mentioned in episode 2 of my own show, but I don't think you've had a chance to see, so I figured, why not write a letter? Caution to Willow Yang, as I'll be asking Rob's opinion on something which will require talking about the finale a bit, so watch this letter if you don't want to be spoiled, or watch this later if you don't want to be spoiled. If memory serves me correctly, Q was never intended to be such a big part of the show, but John kept blowing the writers and the crew away, so they kept bringing him back. That is true. To me, this makes All Good Things the greatest unintentional bookend of all time. The beauty of the performances and the emotion that Q brings out in everyone is just beautiful beyond words, and makes everything he has done since Encounter at Farpoint a beautiful master plan. Has there ever been anything to your recollection that ended up being this way, where the pilot started with something that ended up being tied into the finale like this so well? With that, I bid you adieu, Captain Burnett. Josh, no. For those who don't know, or who doesn't know, maybe Willow doesn't know because she hasn't gotten through the next gen yet. John Delancey did indeed do so well as Q that they kept bringing him back. And again, there was no plan. They had vague plans. But the way that All Good Things goes, and you know what? Maybe not everyone's seen All Good Things, so I'm not going to spoil the episode. But they do a very interesting thing, and they tie All Good Things back into the pilot of Star Trek The Next Generation, which I thought was brilliant. I think All Good Things is one of the great series finales ever. I don't remember a series doing that. Maybe somebody has since then, because All Good Things showed you the way should be done. But I dearly loved All Good Things. I think everybody loves All Good Things. It's one of the great series finales ever. And I'll be curious to hear what Willow Yang thinks. But Josh, I think you're absolutely right. It was never really a master plan, but they did really like John Delancey, so they kept bringing him back. And I thought he does a fantastic job. Of course, they brought him back on Deep Space Nine, and they brought him back on Voyager as well. And who doesn't love Q? I mean, truth be told, I think Q, even though, yes, we've seen omnipotent beings and people like Trelane, I did think Q was a little overpowered. And as far as Star Trek is concerned, even though I love Q and I love Delancey's performance, I thought it was too borderline fantasy to work. But it does, because, look, Tapestry is another episode that I think is one of the great, it's a great Q episode, and it's a great episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. So we couldn't have had Tapestry without Q, so it doesn't bother me. And of course, Q introduced us to the Borg and Q Who in the second season, so they did use him very, very well, extraordinarily well, actually. So yeah, Josh, I think you're right about that, and it's great. It's really great. So absolutely. Oh, so many letters. I don't know. It's intimidating, guys and girls and gentle beings. So many letters to get through. I'm like, what should I read next? I have so many. Well, I'm just going to click on one and see. This comes from Brian Cruz. Hey, Rob, several times I've heard you talk about how much you love the James Bond films. I do as well. It was one of my favorite franchises growing up. I've seen every film at least once, and several of them multiple times. There were periods of my youth when I would spend a couple of weeks watching nothing but Bond films. Today, I had a very shocking realization. I've not watched a James Bond film since Roger Moore died, and I rewatched all of his movies that week. Well, that was 2.5 years ago. I cannot believe I let such a ridiculous thing happen. I went 2.5 years without watching one of my favorite franchises and not realizing it. I'm actually quite ashamed of this. I'm ashamed of Gilbert and Tulu outside barking at somebody. It would be like if you woke up one day and you realized you hadn't watched any Star Trek in over 2 years. Maybe I should do that once. Despite the shame I feel and truly deserve, I'm very excited about how I'm going to fix this. I'm going to rewatch the entire series. I have the really nice Blu-ray box set with every film from Dr. No to Skyfall. Me too. I also do own Spectre, as do I. So it's time I put this set to good use again. While yes, I've seen them all, I've never watched them in the order they were released. Wow, that's interesting. I would just randomly pick one and eventually got to seeing them all. So this might be a new experience for me. I know you have said Sean Connery is your favorite Bond. To be honest, I've probably seen his films the least. What? Goldfinger is the only one of his that I remember seeing multiple times, and I have very little memory of From Russia with Love, Thunderball, and You Only Live Twice. It was not intentional throughout the course of my life. It just happened that way. I'm in the minority on this, but Roger Moore has always been my favorite. The Spy Who Loved Me was the first James Bond film I remember seeing. It was the first Bond movie I saw in the theater. I loved it. I know it is not the best, but I still say it's close to the top of the Bond film rankings, despite people trying to tell me how cheesy it is. Okay, anybody who tells you Spy Who Loved Me is cheesy is wrong. First of all, Spy Who Loved Me is by far the best Roger Moore Bond film. I love it to pieces. It's great. There's nothing about Spy Who Loved Me I don't love. And yes, I even love A View to a Kill, which I do not. But mostly it's for the Duran Duran music and getting to see Christopher Walken as a Bond villain, even though he's totally over the top. I began my rewatch of the entire series tonight. I have a 4-day weekend, so I'm going to try and get through as many as I can now. Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and Goldfinger tonight. That is a trifecta. I mean, Dr. No, it starts out, it's good, but From Russia with Love to me is the purest example of a Bond film made from Fleming's novels. It's still so great. And Goldfinger's great too. Goldfinger was moving the series into the epic, over-the-top, crazy, megalomaniacal villain thing that they were trying to do. But it's great. I love it. And Gert Frobet is Goldfinger, even though I know that he was dubbed, I believe. And hopefully a couple more tomorrow. This is going to be fun rediscovering a franchise I loved growing up. Maybe I'll shoot you another letter after if I notice anything different this time or my opinions about the series change. Love the great work you're doing and keep it up. Well, Brian, tell me what you think. I mean, it's really interesting. Look, to me, the Connery defined what the franchise was. And I've learned over the course of my lifetime that everybody's favorite James Bond is really based on the first Bond film they loved. So the first Bond movies I saw were Sean Connery, and I saw Roger Moore's movies later. But I saw the Connery Bonds because they were on the ABC Sunday Night Movie. And it was a big deal when I was a little kid. You know, my dad would tell me about James Bond, and I started watching James Bond, and I loved him, and it was always Connery. And then Roger Moore came later, and then Spy Who Loved Me, after I was a Bond fan, I was 10 years old, and I saw Spy Who Loved Me after that was the first Bond film I saw in the theater, but I think I had seen up to that point every James Bond movie on TV. So I was already a Bond fanatic. What's interesting, you know what? I want to find out right now. See, Spy Who Loved Me came out the same summer as Star Wars. The Spy Who Loved Me release date, it was July 13th, 1977. So after Star Wars had come out, and Star Wars, you know, it kicked in my movie interest into high gear. I was like, okay, that's what I want to do with my life, is make Star Wars. That same summer was, of course, Spy Who Loved Me. And those two movies, my God, were they were amazing to see. And they affected my fandom now and forever. So, yes, sir. I'd be curious to see where that goes. Where that goes for you. Let's see. So many letters. So many letters. These are just letters that came in on November 1st. Here's a letter from Terry Cooper, member of the Post-Geek Singularity community. Hi, Rob and gang. My thoughts on Terminator Dark Fate. I think I only saw half the film as my eyes spent 50% of the time rolled back in my head. No major spoilers ahead, but my observations might put some people off the idea of seeing it, as I am not a fan. It had some fun action scenes, but that was all. It was a patchwork quilt of set pieces that we've seen before. The emphasis on women being strong and men being expendable or dumb was way overbalanced. Major male pivotal. I'm not going to read that. Insert bland, not white female replacement character that she will give birth to a future resistance leader? No. How dare you even think of that? She's not a baby producing machine. She's a strong female character who is the resistance leader in the future, even though she has no current instincts, savvy, or skills in 2019. Then add a strong female character in Mackenzie Davis. Oops. Lose the female part as she's purposefully androgynous. I don't think Mackenzie Davis is androgynous. She might look it, but I don't see her as androgynous. Being seen as feminine obviously has to be scrapped. I mean, when presented with the choice of taking clothing from a male and a female, she takes the guy's clothes because we can't have a female character standing there in her underwear. Then add a strong female, although I have to say taking a dude's clothes is maybe a trope for Terminator, not just for guys or girls, but in guys too, because, Bill Paxton lost his clothes. Then add a strong female just about character in Sarah Connor, who is essentially a macho old man by now. At least the Danny character has a boyfriend and a father. Nope, let's kill him off. Well, there's Arnold at least. Nope, he's old comic relief, sells curtains, and calls himself Carl. Oh, and he doesn't have a physical relationship with his on-screen partner because that would make him just a bit too manly. Does his partner or their daughter note the choice to give her a daughter instead of a son? Do they get taken out by the forces of evil? No. You can't kill any women in this film. Don't be absurd. She just leaves in a car and is never seen again. And what about our terrifying Terminator? Well, he's non-Caucasian, smaller than Grace, and spends 90% of the film being beaten, shot, and thrown around like a rag doll by women. I don't think he kills any female characters, even the extras, most of which are female, but they quickly ship the male ones in as easy cannon fodder. Even Danny says to Sarah and Grace, "You two are too white." As a side note, I read that the Rev 9 character was originally going to be played by a black actor, hence Dark Fate, the charcoal colored endoskeleton. Come on, dude. And the tar like gloss black liquid metal. But then it was decided not to do this as they risked a backlash from people being offended. Just so you know, that is not true. I watched Mackenzie Davis talking about when she was first looking at all of the storyboards, and they originally wanted Channing Tatum to play the Rev 9, and that's how he was drawn in the original storyboards. This is from Mackenzie Davis's own mouth. And there is no way that they were going to have a black actor and then call the movie Dark Fate. Come on, dude. Come on. Before I get flamed, I wholeheartedly support female leads, heroines, and the like, but this was over-egging the pudding so much it became an omelet. With eggs on top, served with eggs. It went way too far, and they could have done without Sarah or Grace, as both served the role of badass protector. Arnold was a comedic afterthought with only a little bit of heroism, but not enough to finish off the Rev 9. No, Grace has to make... Well, I won't say that. Last night, I rewatched Terminator Salvation, and while it's been given a bum rap, it does a lot right. It's set in a new date, a new twist on the antagonist, the future war and the resistance, new types of machines, personal investment in most of not all the characters, and an ending which lines up with the events of T2 and enhances the character of John Connor. It's fresh and original compared to this greatest hits pastiche called Dark Fate. Calling it the best Terminator film since T2 is not saying much. I personally think Salvation had far more to offer and more to say. I give Dark Fate 5 out of 10. Well, Terry, I want to thank you for writing in. Thanks for your letter. But you know what? Okay, here's the thing. This idea of I don't mind seeing more female characters in movies. It's like, well, why not? Because I've seen male characters in movies my whole life. So it doesn't bother me when I see female characters being put in the place of male actors, because at least it changes it up. You know, it makes something different. I had a young resistance leader in John Connor. I saw Edward Furlong and any number of other older actors play those roles. Christian Bale. I mean, it doesn't bother me to see that. And I don't think that you know, everybody wants to, well, there's this agenda here. My whole thing is this. I've seen these movies with dudes. So if somebody wants, the obvious thing to do to change it up, to make it a little bit different, is to put women in the movie. And if you've got Sarah Connor coming back, you know, kicking ass at 60, why not just flip the script and put more women in? And by the way, you know why? There's a lot bigger female audience for these movies now. When Terminator came out, there were just not as many female fans going to this kind of stuff as there are now. And, you know, you think about it, we have worldwide audiences. Everyone wants to say, oh, there's some racial agenda or feminist agenda. No, there's not. There's a money agenda. These films are being seen around the world more than they ever have. And there's just as many women watching these movies now as men. So what they're doing is they're servicing an audience. They're not servicing this agenda. And this, I'm telling you, they're not. Nobody is sitting there going, well, you know, we're gonna have an anti-white bias and we're gonna bring more women into the movies simply to piss off those white dudes. No. There's a global audience and there's more women. There's different kinds of more people around the world are watching these movies than ever before, and more women are watching these movies ever before. So to increase the audience, ergo, let's make movies that have much more ethnically diverse people and more women in them, because we're serving our audience. Nobody ever says that. The first place everybody goes is like, it's an agenda. Yeah, the agenda is to make money. It's not a political agenda. Nobody's going like, we have to put, you know, we're going to put more women and people of color in this movie because we have a political agenda. No, they're thinking, you know what? There's more people of color and more women that are watching these movies, so let's put characters that they can more closely identify with so they'll watch them. I mean, that's what it is. That's what it is. Now, here's the thing. I understand it might seem that way because once you've decided to make, I mean, here's what's really interesting. Ask yourself, the real question is, forget the protagonist's gender or color or anything like that. Ask yourself, is the storytelling there? Is it good? And if you think that, oh, the women characters, they can do everything. well, isn't that what male characters used to be able to do as well? I mean, it's such a weird thing to me because obviously we're putting more females in movies and more people of color because more females and more people of color are seeing movies. And we're not, America, which was traditionally, America was a predominantly white nation. Over the last 50 years, the demographics in America have been changing. More people from around the world have been coming to America. More languages are spoken here. This is the way of the world. This is where it's going to go. There are more women watching genre entertainment. I wish that there was as many women watching genre entertainment when I was a young man in high school or junior high as there are now. Can you imagine? I mean, how great would that have been? I grew up in a world where I had to beg somebody to sit down, beg a woman to watch a horror movie or watch this episode of Star Trek with me. I was lucky I had a few great girlfriends that were into it, but now it's totally a different world. So why shouldn't we service the audience that exists as filmmakers? I do not think it's agenda based. And once you have a female cast and they're going to be fighting for their lives, what are they supposed to do? Not fight the way male actors fought? I mean, when you're fighting something that you need to use physical force and weapons to fight, how do you do that? I mean, there's only certain ways to do that. And I don't having Mackenzie Davis come back, and I always want to say Mackenzie Phillips. That kind of thing doesn't bother me at all, only because I love her. I loved her in Blade Runner 2049. I loved her in The Martian. I love her. But it's just I that kind of thinking I just don't buy into. I know everybody else buys into it. The real question is, was it a great story well told? Or was it retreading Terminator tropes over and over again? That's where I think the movie falls down. And I'm tired of seeing that. I really am tired. I'm tired of seeing that. I wish that they did something new and different with the franchise. I really do. And I wish they did. I wish that the stories were different and a little bit better. I grow tiresome with the whole this agenda-based storytelling. No, the agenda is to make money. Nobody wants to piss you off. They want your dollar. The King of Scotland is here. Recently on Midnight's Edge, you rightfully went hard at Disney Star Wars. My question is why you don't go after Star Wars that hard on John Campia's show. Well, on John Campia's show, we're doing something a little different. It's not as long. We can't talk about the subject as we can't do it as long form on John's show. And it's more, on John's show, we discuss the business. We do discuss whether or not we think things are good or not, but it's just a different format. And on Midnight's Edge is more of an op-ed show. We're not talking about necessarily daily news information that's dropping. And I think that's why on my show here and on Midnight's Edge, when we talk about these things, I go harder after Star Wars. But I also talk about the fact that, especially here, that when somebody spends $4 billion on something, by definition, they have to find out a way to, you've got to give somebody more of the same. They went the safe route. But that was because, look, even Bob Iger, and I have incredible amounts of respect for Bob Iger. I really do. Even Bob Iger is not some Star Wars fan who sat down and read all of the EU and played all the video games and watched the movies ad infinitum. He's buying Star Wars from a corporate standpoint. This is one of the most valuable entertainment IPs that ever existed. We are going to acquire it. Now, then he has to figure out who's going to make Star Wars, but he also has the Disney brand to think about. What is Disney's mandate with Star Wars? And the problem is, and this is the problem with every single IP, it's certainly the problem with Star Trek now as well. Once the franchise becomes a brand and you start thinking about it as a brand, that means you're thinking about it as a widget. It's a Nike, it's a product to be sold. And the problem is, first and foremost, you're not selling a product, you're selling a story. The story becomes the product that you're selling. But if you think about a story that you're trying to sell as a product first and a story second, that's a problem. Don't put your product, again, part of the Burnett axiom, don't put your product before your story and characters if in fact your product is something that relies upon great story and great characters in order to work. One of the things about Star Wars The Force Awakens is they did not think to themselves, okay, we need to come up with a brand new story, great characters for it to work. They're like, no, we have to recreate what made Star Wars work in the first place and do more of that. That was the easy way to go. But if you're making Star Wars and your premise is, okay, we're going to set this 30 years, it's going to be in continuity. Here's what I don't understand. And it makes no sense to me. Anybody with a rudimentary sense of storytelling. Now, forget what corporate interests are, because with Force Awakens, the corporate interests, and hell, this entire Star Wars sequel trilogy, if you want me to go hard, was based on corporate interests. We just spent $4 billion. We have to justify that expense. That's all that mattered. That's all that matters. Nobody's sitting there thinking to themselves at Disney, we really have to honor the Star Wars franchise. No, they spent $4 billion. We have to pay it back, and we have to pay it back with at least a 30% profit to show that, and hopefully a lot more to show that it was worth buying. That's it. That's what they're thinking. Nobody is thinking, well, we got to, no, they're thinking, okay, how can we deliver the same kind of Star Wars that people have already been paying for? It's not like somebody bought this and said, okay, now Bob Iger's like, now I've had thoughts. I've read. Can you imagine if Bob Iger had read all the EU, had read all the comic books, had seen every episode of Clone Wars, had played all the video games, was totally down with Shadows of the Empire, loved pulling a Star Destroyer out of the sky and Force Unleashed? I mean, if Bob Iger was a dude that knew everything in the world about Star Wars and also authorized them to spend $4 billion, he would have. This is why Kevin Feige is successful. Kevin Feige knows all about the Marvel's comic book universe. He's lived it. He's a total sweaty. He gets a group. He understands what works. There wasn't anybody at Kathleen Kennedy doesn't know Star Wars like that. She knows how to produce a movie. She knows, okay, I've got a script. I can break the script down. I've got a filmmaker. I know how to make that movie. But it's not like she sat down. She has a story group to tell her. And then, she's going to hire people in the story group that she knows or whatever. But that's what people don't understand. It's like Star Wars, their mandate was to they're not going to take some risk. Nobody sat down and goes, okay, this is 30 years after Return of the Jedi. There was nobody there that went, wow, they've already charted that. They've already told these stories beginning with Dark Empire and the Thrawn trilogy back in the early 90s. Those were direct sequels to Return of the Jedi. Why don't we go there? Let's go there and see what they did and take all those great ideas, the world devastator machines or whatever, the Emperor cloning himself. There's all of this stuff. And then you have to think, okay, what is the geopolitical landscape of the Star Wars universe in the wake of the defeat of the Emperor at the Death Star 2? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Where does that lead? If we're going to move the Star Wars universe forward, we've got to figure out. We've seen where the prequel trilogy ended up with the original trilogy, the OT and the prequel trilogy. We've seen that there's a progression there. Okay, Lucas, there's the machinations of, first of all, Senator Palpatine, who became Chancellor Palpatine, who became Emperor Palpatine. Now, how does that going to work? And now, how are we going to do once that rise to power and the Empire is defeated? Then what? Nobody did that. They're like, well, I guess the Empire's defeated. We'll just have the First Order, and it'll be just like the Empire, and nobody will question. Well, why would you do that? Why? We saw the Empire defeated. You're going to take it 30 years into the future because that's how old Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, and Carrie Fisher are. We can get away with saying they're 30 years older. But if you did that, you should also have stopped and thought, okay, we have this universe. It's already there. You don't have to. And what they did was they went back and they tried to reset everything. That's a mistake. Look at Creed. Again, what did Ryan Coogler do? He set his movie after Rocky Balboa. He didn't sit there and, well, we have to create all these we have new characters, but we also have Rocky Balboa. And yet the universe has moved on. Where does Rocky Balboa go after? They didn't try and reset anything. We had a new character. Adonis Creed's son. I mean, Apollo Creed's son, Adonis. And it took all of that into consideration. But Force Awakens didn't do that. It just decided, okay, we're going to have the Resistance and the First Order. I mean, that was when I heard that, I'm like, why would you do that? What story, if you're setting it in the same continuity, why would you possibly do something like that? That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. We've got progression, just like we saw now progression from, we watched how the universe changed from the prequel trilogy to the OT. So your new trilogy, how is that going to work? And what's so funny and what's so maddening to me, it goes back to all this franchise work. We now live in a world where all of these big franchises have all of these spinoffs, video games, comics, books. And rather than sweep all that aside, you've got Steve Sansweet's encyclopedia. You've got all this material. All of this work has been done for you. And if you sit down and take your time, you can honor your franchises by mining all of this information. That's why the Marvel Cinematic Universe is successful. They've gone and they've made their own Marvel universe based on what's in the comics. It's not exact. They've changed things, but they've done it very cleverly. They've done it very interestingly. And I don't understand why Star Trek and Star Wars have not done that. Nope, let's change it all. And it makes no sense. That's the problem. That's what everybody, in this day and age, when we have such great storytelling, there's such great storytelling across the board. And to watch something where I think the disconnect we're all having, especially with franchises like Star Wars, is you ask yourself, you're like, well, wait a minute. This, as an astute viewer or watcher of these things, we know that, wait a minute, this isn't the way it goes. When you tell me that there's a Resistance or a First Order, all right? If you're a Star Wars fan, you've seen 6 previous movies. Forget there was no EU, there was no comics. There has not been countless stories told since the end of Return of the Jedi. Let's just say the 6 Star Wars movies that's it. That's all you have. Well, any astute viewer is going to say to themselves, well, wait a minute. Okay, so they defeat the Emperor. And in the special editions, we've now seen people are celebrating across the galaxy. They're celebrating on Coruscant. They're celebrating on Bespin. There's the whole galaxy is now liberated. Okay, if that's the case, you need to show something. Give us an indication of why is there a Resistance and why is there a First Order? How would anybody allow that to happen again? So when you hear that, immediately, any astute, smart viewer, in the back of their mind, whether you can articulate it or not, you're like, that doesn't seem right to me. And then there's Star Killer Base. It's on a planet. Does it move? I mean, there's all these questions that you ask yourself. These are mistakes that were mandated because somebody said, Disney's got to you got to make it familiar. It's got to be like what people love about Star Wars. Well, what people loved about Star Wars was the fact that all of these things, we've had stories in all of these myriad different ways to tell stories, whether it's books or comics or video games or audio dramas or whatever it is, that there was an attempt to carry the story forward in these other mediums. And the attempt that was made is much more interesting than what we eventually got. And I think that's the real problem with these franchises. And when you spent $4 billion, nobody is gonna. You can't tell somebody. You can't go, hey Bob, there's this character named Mara Jade or Asajj Ventress, or there's all this. He doesn't want to hear that. He doesn't know what the hell that is. He spent $4 billion for Star Wars movies. That's what he bought. He doesn't know everything about Star Wars. That's why he hires other people to tell him what it is. He's like, I got Star Wars. I want to make more Star Wars movies. And that's the problem with the thinking at the studio level, is there's nobody, J.J. Abrams was not thinking about, I've never been a fan of Star Trek. There's comics and novels, really? I know there's merchandising, but I'm not, and he's done that twice with 2 franchises now, with Star Trek and Star Wars. Anything that came before, there's no monetary incentive to delve into that because you don't get paid to do that. You get paid to give C-3PO a red arm. So you get a slice of that cheddar. Let's put a square dish or a rectangular dish on the Millennium Falcon Well, why? Why is there I guess it doesn't matter, but the question is asked, well, if you've done that, if the Millennium Falcon is totally iconic, as it is, why does it have a rectangular dish? Other than the fact that you need to change it so when somebody buys your rectangular dished Millennium Falcon, you get a slice of that merchandising money. Anyway, I could go on this because I think about it too much. Last King of Scotland. See, you got me on a rant. Lewis Yu back again from Joseph. What do you think about Dylan Dog TV show being produced by James Wan? Well, there's been a couple of Dylan Dog movies, like isn't A Cemetery Man, Delamore, and then of course Brandon Routh starred in a Dylan Dog movie. I think a Dylan Dog movie being done by James Wan is incredible. I can't wait. Bring it on. I would love to love it. I would love to see that. Can't wait to see that. Definitely bring it on. The Dylan Dog character is great, by the way. Dieter Bastian says, thanks for reading my letter. You have to watch Jeremy John's spoiler video after seeing Terminator Dark Fate. Just awesome. Don't get angry about the bulb being in economy mode again. The plane sequence is just dark AF. Yeah, it looked, the plane sequence to me looked totally CG. It's very difficult. I have unfortunately, there has been very few movies in the history of Hollywood where they've ever actually been able to get an airliner looking right in a movie. It's really hard to do because unless you paint an airliner and actually fly it, anything to do with an airliner, it's very, very hard, or big airplanes in the sky. And yeah, it's dark because they're hiding the fact that the lighter it gets, the more fake it gets. So yeah, even in the long trailer I saw at CinemaCon, it kind of bummed me out. Amir B says, got my tickets for The Irishman. When are you seeing it? I'm probably going tomorrow at the Egyptian here. I can't wait to see The Irishman. There's so many good movies. I got to see Jojo Rabbit, Irishman, and Terminator. Those are the movies that are on the agenda. So I can't wait. I can't wait for people to go see The Irishman in the theater. Tim is back here. Tim, the Spider Monkey. That is why I want Filoni as creative supervisor, not to run it, but to keep the stories on track. He knows the universe and what works, like Feige. Look, I agree. The only thing is, the one thing about Feige, he not only understands the stories, but making live action is very different than making animation. Very, very, very different. And I've gotten some insight into how animation is made lately, so that's been good. But yeah, I think that you're right. I mean, Filoni knows the universe, and that's what you need. But you also need somebody that understands how do you make things, how do you make live action stuff. And I think that's one of the strengths of Feige is he's one of the first true. When I say he's not really he's a fan that's also a professional movie maker, and he cut his teeth coming up. He's worked almost exclusively on Marvel films, but he used to work for Richard Donner. I believe he was concurrent with Jeff Johns. So he's unique. He's unique in Hollywood, which is great. And yeah, I mean, I think that's very, very important. But yeah, this is a Jeffrey Mao, Jeffrey M, a long time, always writing in good letters. Jeff Mao says, hi, Rob, I wanted to shoot off a quick letter talking about the recent greenlighting by HBO for the House of the Dragon series, based on material from George R.R. Martin on the history of the Targaryen dynasty prior to the events of Game of Thrones. I believe it was Stubble McShave who asked if the sets could be reused from the aborted sister series to Dragon, purportedly called Blood Moon. At least that was its production name. I find it unlikely that any sets could be reused, given that the setting of Blood Moon would have been thousands of years before Dragon. Winterfell likely was a tiny version of itself, probably just starting to be built, and none of the other known castles existed. They could have fudged the dates somewhat to make everything kind of happening at the same time, but it would have diverged further and further from what's been written already. On the other hand, I believe a big reason for why HBO went with Dragon is that, yes, they can reuse sets, but not from Blood Moon from the original series. Why? Because it's been reported that the core story of Dragon will focus on Dance of the Dragons, the Targaryen civil war for succession that took place 100 plus years before the events in Game of Thrones. All of the locations in the original series existed at that time. King's Landing had already been built up for the 170 years after Aegon's conquest. Everything would have looked pretty similar, even costumes, props, weapons. They could all be reused with minimal redressing. The other popular choice would have been to have covered Robert's Rebellion. However, Martin has been very hesitant to allow that. It has already covered a lot in both the novels and the supporting material. I also suspect that Martin has some secrets to reveal about Robert's Rebellion in the books, although clearly the biggest secret from that time period has already been revealed in the show in the form of Jon Snow's true parentage. Another important reason why Robert's Rebellion will not be done as its own series is that almost every adult character from Game of Thrones was involved in Robert's Rebellion. We're talking Ned, Catelyn, Robert, Littlefinger, Jaime, Cersei, Tywin, Tyrion, etc. You're talking a lot of characters that would likely need to be recast with younger actors, as I doubt you would de-age every one of them. It would kind of be jarring to see every one of them played by someone else. Those are my 2 cents. I have more thoughts on the overall problem with doing a spin-off series of major IPs like Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings that I'll cover in a different letter. Thanks, Jeff. Look, I think that's really astute. I thought the same thing. The reason you can do the Targaryen Civil War is you can just shoot it in the same place and it'll still be interesting because what you've got, I hope it doesn't turn out to be like Phantom Menace, where you can finally see the Jedi at the height of their power, as you can see dragons and people utilizing dragons at the height of their power, but it becomes muddled. I want to see a great show. That's what I hope we get, and I think we probably will. There's a reason why this pilot was scrapped. Although I'd love to see the pilot they did, the Naomi Watts pilot, because it was shot and they decided to scrap it during editorial. But the fact that it really didn't work, I mean, couldn't they have finished it as a prequel movie of some kind? I mean, I find it really interesting after we've seen like El Camino and we have the Sopranos feature film being shot already, the prequel film, that it could have been, I mean, it had to have not been that good, apparently. And maybe that's why it was just killed. But it would be interesting to see it released as sort of maybe an oddity, like the show you're never going to see, but just a prequel to Game of Thrones taking place thousands of years earlier. And maybe ultimately that's what didn't work about it. The fact that it was killed, I think if somebody said, Rob, why did they kill this pilot so quickly? My first guess would be that sometimes you realize your whole premise and what you've done just doesn't work. And I think what didn't work was the fact that if you go back thousands of years into the past, that you realize that, wait a minute, King's Landing wasn't there. These people would basically be living in tents. You wouldn't have the kind of civilization that was built up to like the Middle Ages. So maybe it just didn't work, where people are like, wait a minute, this is supposed to take place thousands of years ago. Well, look at how we were thousands of years ago. And maybe it just didn't work. And they couldn't realize that until they saw it. They tried to make it work and it just didn't. That's what I assumed happened. And the idea of the Targaryen Civil War, that just seems cool. People are going to be into that. So why not? But I think you're absolutely right about that. I think you and I, Jeffrey, as often we do, agree with one another. So I think you're probably absolutely right about that. So yeah, but I don't know. I do not know. Stubble McShave says many fantasy series in 2020. Oversaturation risk. You know what? I mean, my God, I would have thought so. There's so many interesting shows on. There's just so much to watch. I love it, but it's always you get to always catch up with something, which I think is great. As long as it's good, we should have such problems. Only thing is, it just makes me wonder if we're going to value, if there's so much entertainment, you just move on to the next thing. I mean, I've spent my life studying how movies are made. And while I haven't necessarily had the breakthrough success of being able to make a lot of movies, even though, I've worked on low budget things, I think that I've brought a sensibility to the things that I love that has made them better. I just haven't worked on any really big projects, but I'm still, slugging away. But I do think by having so much good stuff when it's in one ear and out the other, we take it for granted now. And even Star Trek, it's crazy to me that once again we're going to have two different Star Trek shows rolling, and then we've got animated shows being made. It's crazy. I just hope that Star Trek Picard's really, really good. I really do. But I don't know. Oversaturation, hey, as long as there's good stuff to watch. I mean, hell, the way binge whip through things so quickly, it's I'm always running out of stuff, even though there's so much stuff to watch. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a great chat. I need to bring this chat to an end because I'm tired. We've been going for almost 2 hours. I want to thank my moderating staff. First of all, Jordy Lyons, Lewis Yu, my new moderators. I want to thank, of course, the Sheriff of Nottingham, Terry. I want to thank Greg Smith. I also want to thank, of course, Detective Jim and the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden, who he's been mayor of Riverdale, Iowa for the last 2 years. He is he's fighting for his life, his re-election campaign. I'm looking for my Mike for Mayor button, which is not, oh, here it is. Wait, is it right? Yes, it is. Mike for Mayor. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike for Mayor, Riverdale, Iowa. Mike for Mayor. The election is coming up on Tuesday, so good luck to Mike. I will be back tomorrow. I'm on the John Campy Show, obviously, on Monday. Go Seahawks, and whoever your team is, I hope they do well. And this will be an end for Robservations episode number 266, closing in on 300. By God, if you like these chats, please hit like, please subscribe. As Gary from Nerdrotic will tell you, they're always changing the algorithms around, and whether it's me or your other favorite YouTuber will thank you. And boy, we all need that help. I want to thank everybody who supports the channel via signing up for the website or sending super chats or any kind of support, the Patreon, whatever, however you want to support me. I do appreciate it very much. And if you have ideas for how I can step up the show, different things, check those out. And also my November movie choices you can find in Living the Lucky Tiger Life. Robservations presents Living the Lucky Tiger Life on episode 6. That is on the YouTube channel now. So check that out. And that brings me to an end of Robservations 266. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I bid you farewell. And you know what I'm going to say. As always, have a better day.